Well, I invite you to join council in O Canada. Thank you, everyone. I'm now going to give our land acknowledgement. 210 years ago, Indigenous people here began welcoming settlers from all over the British Empire. Soon, they were helping slaves escaping from the United States to settle here too. Today, our Indigenous founding partners are still here enjoying this land with us. They fish and camp under their Treaty 22 rights. Indigenous people in their thousands also live with us as neighbors and friends. Our Indigenous white and Black settlers created a community with an attractive degree of harmony and prosperity. And in 1857, Ontario gave official recognition of Oakville as a town. At Town Hall 160 years later, we fly the flag of the Mississaugas of the Credit beside the flags of Oakville, Ontario, and Canada. We fly these flags together to acknowledge our origins. People from all over the world are attracted to the livability we have created. We offer newcomers a warm spirit of welcome. We offer everyone our founding story so everyone knows what we are part of. We feel sorrow and distress for acts of racism and intolerance suffered across Canada and here at home. We want our future to be equitable and inclusive for all. The path of truth and reconciliation can unite us all. Please keep well, stay safe, and let me know of any chance to be helpful to you and yours, or contact your member of council. Please let us know anytime you can help increase Oakville's harmony, prosperity, and livability. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets for this evening?
There are no regrets for tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see no declarations. And I believe now it would be good to confirm the minutes of the previous meetings as listed in the agenda. Councilor Lischinna, thank you. Councilor Chisholm, thank you for seconding that. Is there any corrections or objections? Then the minutes as listed in the agenda are adopted. Thank you, everybody. We have no public presentations tonight, but our business would be made smoother perhaps if we moved into committee of the whole. Would two of you like to accomplish that for us? Councilor Longo and Councilor Giddings, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's being no objection, the motion carries, and we are now in committee of the whole. The prime difference is we don't need seconders for motions, and I hope I can avoid calling for seconds as a result of that. Council, the first business before us are the consent items, confidential and public, consent item 7.1 and confidential consent item 8.1. Is there a motion for the consent items? Councilor O'Meara? And a second? Oh, we don't need a second. Look, I made the mistake already. Is there any objection to Councilor O'Meara's motion? Madam Clerk, there is none, and the consent items are adopted. So now we have a number of discussion items. There is 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's only 8. And we're going to start with the live verbal update on COVID from our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Jane Closey. Ms. Closey, you have the Zoom and the floor, and we're all ears.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I have rather a short update today for you, and also further to your request about an update on the emergency management plan. Paul Bostoneau, our fire chief, will be providing that shortly after my presentation. So overall, the news on the number of cases has been generally positive over the last few weeks. While we've not seen a significant drop in cases, we've certainly seen a gradual decline that's been happening. No doubt with Ontario staying in the step 3, which has been in for quite some time early in the summer, the increased vaccination rates that we're seeing throughout the province, the passport and the mandatory vaccinations for all those non-essential facilities, we've actually been able to avoid a lockdown and yet still see a downward trend in the cases. And this is all very positive. Last week, the provincial science table had indicated that delaying any further lifting of restrictions would be prudent. We're just coming out of Thanksgiving, and the full impact of Thanksgiving has not yet been felt on the number of cases. People are also moving indoors. It finally turned a little chilly today, so we are starting to move indoors. And there has been the student or school outbreaks that we've been experiencing over the last few weeks. So the message for Ontario continues to be, we're cautiously optimistic, but that does mean that all the health protection measures we put in place still need to be in place so that we can, and most importantly, that the vaccinations continue to increase so that everyone is vaccinated, and hopefully that should move us out of the pandemic. In terms of the vaccination rates, in Ontario, it is 87 for those on the first dose, 83 fully vaccinated. For the region, it's about the same amount, 84% for those fully vaccinated. And we sit in a much better position than the rest of the country. The federal or the Canada's vaccination rates is 78% for first dosage and 73% for the second dosage. So Ontario is doing very well in comparison to the other provinces in the country. Recently, the province did make some changes to their capacity limits for some specific areas. For us, that meant an increased capacity at our Oakville Centre for Performing Arts, some of our special events that we have underway, arenas and other indoor sports events or facilities, as well as some of our room rentals at our recreation and cultural facilities. So that we have implemented given the lifting of the capacity limits or the changes in the capacity limit. Also, today is the first day where we can, well, all of us can now download the QR if you haven't already based on your birth date over the last few days. So that will give us all easier access into all the non-essential facilities and businesses that require full vaccinations. In terms of the town's recreation and cultural facilities, we will have the ability in place by the end of the week in order to be able to easily read those QR codes so that access into our facilities will be a little bit easier than it has been with the paper copy that we've had to deal with over the last few weeks. So one area of concern that's been raised by members of the community is the inability for non-vaccinated people or non-fully vaccinated people to be able to enter town hall to obtain a marriage license. So marriage licenses are regulated by the province. It is by their rules that we must follow. We have no ability really to change or alter those rules at all. The province had, very early in the pandemic, amended several pieces of legislation in order to allow for remote commissioning of documents, which is what is needed through the marriage process. However, to be able to submit those documents into the registrar requires still a paper copy. So it's not a smooth process of an online process in order to be able to manage the marriage licenses. So at this time, we are looking at how we can at least simplify the piece of the process that the legislation has changed to allow us to do as much online as possible. And then work with the registrar's office to see how we could perhaps simplify that process. So we are working on that. At the same time, other municipalities have actually implemented a curbside service. Vaughan is one example. So we're following up with them as well as some others to see what is entailed in that. So at this point in time, the people who can obtain a marriage license from Oakville would be those that are fully vaccinated until we work through those other two processes to find an easier way. So that completes my part of the presentation. I do want to introduce Fire Chief Bossino, and then I thought at the end of his presentation, both of us would be available to answer any questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief Bossino.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, and good evening, members of council. Thank you, CAO Closey. This evening, I'm going to be providing you a presentation on the emergency management update, and we're going to look at, sorry, I don't have the controls as of yet. There we go. So the presentation, we're going to look at the legislative overview, some of the emergency management hierarchy, responsibilities, and overall approach. Going to look at the pandemic response governance component, the COVID-19 response in general, some future considerations, as well as next steps. So on the legislative overview, certainly all of the legislation comes back to the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act and any of the supporting regulations that go along with that act. Specifically, the reference that I've provided here is that in the event of a provincially declared emergency, what powers exist. The provincial government's powers under the EMCPA are not limitless, but they certainly are obviously extremely important. The emergency management hierarchy slide that I'm showing you now basically dictates things from the EMCPA down to the Orders in Council and the Ontario regulations process, then into the ministry emergency plans and municipal emergency plans to be developed at the local municipal level. The municipal, ministry, and provincial responsibilities shows you a check mark associated with all the components, whether it be at the municipal level for the town of Oakville or the ministry in a declared emergency, such as the Ministry of Health, and the provincial guidance and or components specific to a declared emergency. There's a reminder that a provincial declaration for municipalities, that's a minimum standard requirement. And just like bylaws, there is the ability for a municipality to impose greater restrictions, but never less than. As an example, when we talk about the ministry involved, so the Ministry of Health, there is a HERP plan, which is the Health Emergency Response Plan, and even in that plan, there was little indication of anything that would span 19 months in general. So an emergency management approach shows basically right down to the individual level, spanning up to the municipal level, provincial, and federal. And it certainly can be a bottom-up or a top-down approach, and that there's an expectation under emergency management that the individual themselves prepares themselves for emergencies. And probably the best example I can give to an illustration of this diagram is the overall vaccination supply and to the point of the jab in the arm, so to speak. So when we talk about an individual getting a vaccination, obviously there are policies and decisions of council. There are obviously Ministry of Health direction and guidance. There's provincial distribution and allocation to priority groups. And then of course, there's the federal procurement and access to vaccinations that they provide to the provinces in order to distribute. So the governance for pandemic response was guided by provincial actions and direction. Since this was a health emergency, technical guidance was provided by the Chief Medical Officer of Health to both the Cabinet Office and the local public health units. to direct proactive or protective actions and protect the health and safety of all residents. This was also supported, obviously, by some additional organizations, just to name a few, obviously the Science Advisory Table, Health Canada, CDC, World Health Organization, to name just a few. The COVID-19 response framework speaks to the declaration of the emergency back in March of 2020. The Ontario government declared a provincial emergency in response to the global pandemic as identified and declared by the World Health Organization. The powers under the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act allow the government to utilize sweeping statutory powers to impose some of the things listed here as well for provincial travel restrictions, mandate further closures, emergency facility usage, introduce price controls and procurement of goods and services and resources as it deems necessary. There's also a stepped and phased approach to restrictions, controls, and recoveries, as CAO Closey just mentioned about being and remaining in step 3. As we've seen through the pandemic, some of those goals and or percentages within those stepped framed guidework has changed over time as better evidence-based research comes in associated with the pandemic. So the Town of Oakville's response. Town of Oakville declared the emergency on March 24th due to COVID-19. The town's response is prescribed in the emergency plan. That provides the overall structure and framework for all types of emergencies. Under the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act, the head of council, Mayor Burton, may declare an emergency and take necessary actions to protect the community. The Emergency Control Group, or ECG, and functions within the Emergency Operations Center provide the information for policy decisions of council, and some of those examples are mask mandates, mandatory vaccinations. So the ECG provides overall operational response. It updates council, and all policy-based decisions are subject to council approval. The ECG group is responsible for the implementation of the IMS system, which is the incident management system, and the coordination within the EOC, so the Emergency Operations Center. Oftentimes, if it was, say, a natural disaster or something to do with flooding or tornado or something of that nature, there would be a physical activation of the EOC. In this case, because of the public health restrictions, it was a virtual-based EOC for operations. IMS in itself was created for scale and scope of emergencies, and provincial IMS is a requirement under Emergency Management Ontario. It identifies positions and roles and responsibilities versus an individual indication of who shall do those things. So roles and responsibilities versus an marked individual. IMS in itself was created back in the 70s associated with California wildfires, and it was to deal with multi-agency approach and deal with different jurisdictional components. Some additional components for the Town of Oakville's response is the Recovery Committee. The role is to return the community to its pre-emergency state. It provides continuity between the emergency and recovery operations. Some of the Recovery Committee decisions have to be made quickly due to implementation timelines and then subject to council approvals. And the Recovery Committee activation is determined by the Emergency Control Group, and the composition of the Recovery Committee is again identified in the Emergency Response Plan. For those who want to find the components for the Recovery Committee, it's in Section 5 of our emergency plan. And probably the uniqueness associated with this declared emergency that is somewhat challenging, obviously on a global scale, is that the Emergency Control Group for us is the ebb and flow associated with the pandemic, in that we're not just dealing with a response and then a termination of a response and into a full recovery phase. As we've seen different waves within the pandemic, it's almost a concurrent response and recovery effort all the way through the pandemic. Modeling, science, and data predictors have had varying levels of success with obviously different variants and different changes throughout the pandemic. The Recovery Committee works closely with the Emergency Control Group to include the head of council for evolving issues such as pandemic step changes and/or lockdowns. So continuing on with the Town of Oakville's response, flexible response based upon evolving situations with COVID-19. A pandemic is unique, as I stated, its response and recovery, and could rapidly change and can be simultaneous. The response governed by Ontario's incident management system with Emergency Management Ontario, and it's adapted to meet public health guidelines. And again, the example best suited is that it's a virtual EOC since the inception of the declaration of an emergency. The declaration of an emergency gives the town abilities under the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act, such as rapid procurement, reassigning staff, contractual and collective agreement, emergency considerations, amongst others. As we move through the fourth wave, a recovering and reopening effort is obviously underway and maintained. There remains uncertainty towards potential possible variants, additional waves, and herd immunity status. Termination of emergency, its value provided above obviously is given. However, there remains some regional emergency declaration considerations, as well as some other key components. There remains obviously an optics and importance for controls and restrictions to be maintained and continued vaccination push. The group of 5 to 11-year-old vaccination process and timeframes, the situation involving herd immunity, that percentage basis has changed since the start of the pandemic. What was thought to be potential considerations for herd immunity has not yet been achieved. And we also know that vaccinations are certainly promoted for the health and safety of everyone. However, vaccinations are not a bulletproof vest. Approximately 25 to 27% of new COVID cases daily remain in those who are fully vaccinated. Some future considerations. We'll continue to monitor emerging trends and issues such as caseloads, variants, and evolving public health guidance. Continue to provide accurate information to guide the town's response and planning in order to be nimble and adaptable for changing circumstances. Follow public health guidance for the response. Some of the components for this might be things such as Health Canada's review for trial data with the children aged 5 to 11 emerging school trends and the data provided by Pfizer. Submission by Pfizer today for the final submission for Health Canada's review for the vaccination studies. So hopeful that everything goes well with that Health Canada submission. There's a clear message that has been sent, as CAO closely mentioned, towards some of the vaccination rates across Canada, that deviation from a stepped approach too quickly can often have dire consequences. We've seen some challenges experienced, unfortunately, in Alberta, where positivity rates still remain over 7.5% today, and almost 13,000 active COVID cases. The ICU capacity is sitting at 161%, and they've had to secure 205 surge beds to try and deal with those capacity challenges. Ontario, as far as today's rates, is at a 1.8% positivity rate and 3,846 active cases. So next steps in emergency management. We continue to review the Town of Oakville's emergency plan to reflect the current assumptions and options for business continuity, lessons learned, and best practices. We remain compliant for Emergency Management Ontario and municipal responsibility requirements under the Act. The pandemic response for emergency management and scenario-based training that we've done in the past were based upon assumptions for SARS or H1N1. And when you think back to the challenges for SARS, that was a 3-month process, and very much identifiable to some specific areas. I think that it would be safe to say that COVID-19 and the thought process that we'd be 19 months out from the start of it and still in this pandemic would be something that I don't think was predicted right from the start. Continuous improvements, like any lessons learned, will be incorporated into the plan. And certainly the optics and importance to the control measures and restriction measures for indoor gatherings and late fall winter activities, as the CAO mentioned as well, for cold and flu seasons in their normal timeframes will be obviously consideration. The good news is that the modeling trends continues down the path of best case scenario for case counts at this time. And that's my presentation for you this evening. I hope that gives you a little bit of an understanding for the legislative and governance practice and where we are for our emergency plan as of today.
Thank you, Chief. CAO Closey, perhaps you and the Chief could take questions. The first questioner will be Councillor Liz Chenna.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Jane and Chief, for the presentation. Jane, you had mentioned regarding the QR code for the access to the rec and culture. This sort of sparked my thought about the new registration system. How has the uptake been, and has there been any issues regarding that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're referring to the recent, the Perfect Mind, I'll refer it to. Actually, I understand it has gone very well. The uptake has been quite good on the new registration system. And I'm sure in the update that I send out this week, you can give you a little more stats specifically about the uptake on that. But overall, it's gone very, very well.
Excellent. Good to hear. And my second question is about the marriage license issue. Do you have any numbers, percentage, or number of couples that have not been able to get a license in the last couple of weeks since the mandatory vaccination policy for town hall?
So I understand, no, we don't. I'm looking at the clerk and she's shaking her head no. There is a fairly limited number. So I would say overall, I think the number of marriage licenses that come in on a daily basis is maybe 10 is what we've seen. But that includes all of them, not just the ones that are not vaccinated, who aren't able to enter our facility.
Okay. I mean, it's been an issue that's obviously alerted to council with respect to the emails coming through. So I wanted to know how large it actually, the magnitude of it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liz Chenna. Other questions? Councillor O'Meara, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. CAO Close, I'm just wondering if there's an update on our employee vaccination mandate and where we are with that and timelines around there.
So in terms of, we've had 99% of our staff declare, and of those 95%, I think that is 95 or 96. Let me just check my note here, sorry. Yeah, 95% are either fully vaccinated or will be by October the 31st. So that's where we stand at this point in time. Quite positive.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Anyone else? All right. Would one of you like to move receipt of the information? Councillor Liz Chenna, thank you very much. Any objection? There being none, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to our second discussion item, which is the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program. And we have Martin McGuire, the Manager of Transportation Services, and Jill Stephen, the Director of Transportation and Engineering, and a number of listed delegations. I think there's 7 or 8. And so, Council, I propose that we hear from staff first, then delegations, and then questions from Council. All right, Mr. McGuire, you get the floor.
Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of Council. Next slide, please. Over the years, the town has implemented various initiatives related to traffic safety. The Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program will coordinate all of these initiatives for all road users. This presentation will provide a summary of each component of the program. Next slide, please. The first component of the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program is the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit implementation. Next slide, please. In January, Council approved the 2 existing neighborhood 40-kilometer-an-hour zones in West River and Heritage Way, the pink areas shown on the map. Council also endorsed a 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit on all locals and minor collectors in conjunction with a comprehensive education program. The local and minor collector roads are shown in red on the map, and as you can see, they make up the majority of our road network. Council asked us to develop and report back on an implementation plan for the speed limit reduction. Next slide, please. We reviewed 2 options: retaining the current default speed limit of 50 kilometers an hour or reducing the default speed limit to 40 kilometers an hour. Our recommendation is to reduce the default speed limit to 40 kilometers an hour because it will require fewer sign changes, which means we can implement the 40K much quicker over one sign installation season and at a much lower cost. We have received feedback from some residents who oppose the speed limit reduction and some who support the reduction but would like the 40K limit to be signed. We recognize that lowering the posted speed limit alone is not enough to have a widespread impact on driver behavior, and that's why the Neighborhood Safety Program has a number of components. As far as the signing question, for the reasons that I described earlier, and as a way to minimize visual clutter, we're recommending the option that results in fewer sign installations. Next slide, please. We plan to begin the sign changes in April of next year. Since this will take a few months to complete, there will be a transition period where in some cases the signage may not match the bylaw. We will work with Halton Police on enforcement practices during this transition period. One of the impacts of the speed limit reduction is on one of our bus routes, namely Route 11 in southeast Oakville. Once the 40K speed limit is in effect on the roads that this route serves, the service frequency will be reduced. Next slide, please. We realize that with a change of this significance, communication will be key to making sure that residents and visitors understand the change. Motorists will need to understand that when they're driving on a road without speed limit signs, it means that the speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour. We're working with corporate communications on a communication plan that you see on the slide. And I'll speak to education related to the overall program on a later slide. Next slide, please. The next component of the program is community safety zones. Next slide, please. We currently have 21 community safety zones across town, shown in red lines on the map. There's at least one community safety zone in every ward with the exception of Ward 6. The majority of these were implemented in 2019 at every all-day 40-kilometer-an-hour zone fronting an elementary school on a major road. It's important to mention the connection between the automated speed enforcement program and community safety zones. The current ASC legislation only permits cameras to be installed in community safety zones. Next slide, please. Given the connection to ASC and the anticipated demand for community safety zones, we have revised our community safety zone definition and developed a quantitative method for evaluation. Using this new assessment method, we're recommending the addition of a community safety zone in Ward 6 on Glen Ashton. This results in each ward having at least one community safety zone and therefore at least one location for an ASE camera. As part of our neighborhood traffic safety program, we'll do an annual review of proposed community safety zone locations. Next slide, please. The next component of the program is automated speed enforcement. Next slide, please. In December 2020, Council endorsed the activation of ASE cameras in conjunction with the implementation of an administrative monetary penalties system, otherwise referred to as AMPS, to resolve charge disputes. Since that time, staff have been working on the required agreements. In May, we signed the agreement with the City of Toronto, who manages the Joint Processing Centre. In July, we signed the contract with the equipment vendor Redflex, and we'll sign the agreement with the MTO, which permits access to the license plate information later this year. We're also scheduling the before speed studies for this fall and spring of next year. These are a mandated part of the ASE program, and the results will be compared to speed studies conducted after the cameras are installed. Next slide, please. The Ministry of Transportation recently stated that all forms of automated enforcement will be eligible to be processed under the AMPS regime starting in summer of 2022, and we continue to recommend implementation of ASE in conjunction with AMPS. Although a number of municipalities are processing charges under the current regime of the Provincial Offences Act, there is concern that the processing of ASE disputes under the Provincial Offences Act in Oakville would compromise more serious offences before the court. Oakville has limited court time to deal with offences under town bylaws such as the Building Code and Fire Code. The addition of ASE charges without additional staffing and judicial resources would significantly impact court scheduling capacity. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the ASE legislation permits cameras to only operate in community safety zones. We're recommending an initial deployment of 7 mobile cameras in order to allow for 1 camera in each ward at all times. We will develop a rotation schedule in conjunction with councillors for wards with multiple community safety zones. Due to the limitations on the number of charges that can be processed, the cameras do not operate 24/7. Municipalities who have existing programs have indicated that in some cases, their cameras are operational only 2 to 3 hours a day. However, the good news is that these municipalities have also reported that their data shows reduced operating speeds, whether the camera is operational or not. Next slide, please. There is an annual net cost to run the ASE program estimated at $225,000. The largest single cost is the daily operating fee paid to the equipment vendor. On the revenue side, the distribution of the revenues is based on an existing revenue sharing agreement within the region, which results in Oakville receiving a disproportionate share of the revenue. I should note that these cost estimates are based on the processing of charges through provincial offences, and we will refine these costs as we learn more about the implications of processing charges through AMPS. Next slide, please. The next component of the program is traffic calming. Next slide, please. So in December 2020, Council approved staff-recommended changes to the traffic calming process and a 5-kilometer-an-hour reduction in the speed threshold to qualify for traffic calming. Subsequently, in January, Council endorsed the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit reduction. Since our traffic calming thresholds are based on the speed limit, we anticipate a significant increase in the number of locations that will qualify for traffic calming once the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit is implemented next year. Next slide, please. For the remainder of 2021, we will focus on the 19 backlog locations that we're currently dealing with and will be adding new requests to a list for future study. In 2022, we'll observe the impacts of both the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit reduction as well as ASE implementation, and we will conduct select speed studies town-wide. In 2023, we plan to report to Council on our 2022 observations and recommend any proposed changes to the traffic calming process and thresholds. Next slide, please. To assist residents with understanding the history of speed studies and whether or not they qualify for traffic calming on their street, as well as to cut down on the staff time responding to data requests, we've developed an online resident speed survey tool, which is now live. Residents can click on the link and are presented with a town map that highlights with red lines those streets that have historic speed data. The resident finds their street, clicks on the red line, and is presented with a dialog box that tells them the survey date, the existing speed limit, a yes or no answer to whether or not traffic calming threshold is met, the survey results including the operating speed and traffic volume by direction. If there are multiple studies, they click on the arrow to access historic data to see how speeds have changed over time. Next slide, please. The next component of the program is pedestrian crossovers. Next slide. We typically install 10 PXOs per year based on the criteria that we established in the 2017 Pedestrian Safety Program. When we have the opportunity, we will install PXOs as part of a larger capital project, and these are over and above the 10 annual installations. There were no installations in 2020 due to the pandemic, but we have 19 installations planned for this fall. This year's installations will be funded through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. In 2022 and beyond, we will revert back to the 10 annual installations. Next slide, please. The next component of the program is Vision Zero. Many municipalities have adopted a philosophy termed Vision Zero. The philosophy says that traffic fatalities and injuries are preventable. Vision Zero is not a new product or technology, but more of a strategy that puts the responsibility on policymakers and designers to ensure safety for all road users. We've been looking at how other municipalities have used Vision Zero and have had some initial engagement with stakeholders, but we have more work to do, and our goal is to report back to Council by the end of this year. Whether we ultimately adopt Vision Zero itself or components of the Vision Zero program, the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program is designed to increase our focus on safety for all road users. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we're working on an overall neighborhood traffic safety education program. Next slide, please. We're proposing an education program that will address all neighborhood traffic safety components, not just the 40K implementation and automated speed enforcement. We'll continue to make use of standard communications such as social media, web updates including Hero on oakville.ca, news releases, digital screens at town facilities. But we also want to make use of existing annual programs that have a traffic safety connection, such as Bike Month, Crossing Guard communication, and our quarterly pedestrian safety campaign. Next slide, please. We'll be working with corporate communications to create dedicated education materials, such as postcards to be handed out by the police during the 40K speed limit implementation. And we know other departments connect with the community in a number of ways that we can make use of. For example, we've already had some initial discussions with library staff on how to provide traffic safety materials through some of their existing programs. We also plan to make use of opportunities such as Resident Association annual general meetings and the Mayor's Community Leaders Roundtable to deliver messages related to traffic safety. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary of costs and funding sources associated with the neighborhood traffic safety components. The funding for the 40K implementation will come from next year's capital budget. The cost for implementing community safety zones will be relatively minor since it's mainly the cost of signage, and annual costs will vary depending on how many locations qualify. I earlier reviewed the expenses and revenues associated with the ASE program, and this will be discussed further at Budget Committee. Traffic calming and PXO installations will continue to be annual programs funded through capital. And finally, we will provide details on Vision Zero related costs in our upcoming report to Council. Next slide, please. Next slide. The timeline on this slide gives a graphic indication of how we will be working on several neighborhood traffic safety initiatives concurrently. For the remainder of 2021, we'll be implementing traffic calming and installing pedestrian crossovers, and we'll be reporting back on Vision Zero. Next spring and summer, we will implement the 40K speed limit, as well as install our first ASE cameras. We will also continue to develop our neighborhood traffic safety education program. Later in 2022, we'll conduct some data collection and analysis, culminating in a report back to Council on traffic calming, as well as our annual community safety zone evaluation. Thank you for the opportunity to review our neighborhood traffic safety program, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Councillor Giddings, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, appreciate the presentation. I realize this will be a popular topic, so I just have a few for you this time. In terms of, you talked about visual clutter of signs. Are we dictated by the Highway Traffic Act in terms of minimums or distances between signs or any kind of standards of that sort?
Through you, Mayor Burton, no, it's not through the Highway Traffic Act. That comment about signage visual clutter is really just feedback that we get from residents that obviously there are traffic signs that support a number of our bylaws, and we often get feedback from residents when we're about to install a sign that's in front of their property or close to their property that there are concerns. So we try and minimize, we want to deliver the message. We want to make sure that people understand the rules of the road and our bylaws, but we're also trying to strike that balance with minimizing the number of signs we install.
So there's no requirement to have those signs? That's correct. All right. In terms of, I understand that all community safety zones are 40 kilometers an hour, but not all 40 kilometer an hour zones are community safety zones. Could you just run that by us?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I don't think that that's correct, that all communities, a community safety zone does not necessarily have to have a speed limit of 40. Some of the original implementation in Oakville was on 40K zones, but as we evaluate future locations, there isn't a direct connection to the speed limit.
So it depends on the level of the roadway being one of the deciding factors.
Correct. The quantitative assessment method that we're proposing in the report, we will run the locations through that assessment, and the speed limit isn't one of those criteria. The speed limit could vary.
All right, thank you. Two additional quick questions. You talked about the need for mandatory speed studies to be conducted before implementation of the program. Any concern of having those done during the pandemic when the traffic patterns are altered in terms of whether school is open or closed, or number of pedestrians, number of commuters?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I understand the concern. We're just trying to make sure that we have sort of limited resources with our data collection program, and we just want to make sure that we get them completed all of the before studies before the first cameras go in. So it will be, we'll try and get some completed this fall, say the rest of this month and November, and then we'll be into spring of next year.
I understand. All right, and the last question I have for now, the cost of the program. Could you just run that by us? A lot of the comments we get and other municipalities receive as well is that it's simply a cash grab. You know, it's a way of making money. According to this, it doesn't look like we're going to be making a lot of money on it. Could you just take us through a little more detail in terms of the contractor that we have to use and the provincial regulations that are in place on this?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So there are a number of different components on the expense side. The first being, as you touched on, the equipment vendor Redflex. So every municipality in Ontario that participates in the ASE program must use Redflex. So they have some standard rates depending on whether you're using mobile cameras or fixed cameras. And the biggest expense is the daily operating fee that they charge. So for a mobile camera, it's $95 per camera per day. They also charge a redeployment rate, which is a minor cost relative to the daily operating rate. But as we get into a rotation schedule, it is the vendor who, it's their staff that moves the equipment. So there is a fee associated with redeployment. The Joint Processing Center is managed by the City of Toronto. And again, all Ontario municipalities that participate in the program, all of the images that are collected by the cameras are processed through that Joint Processing Center. So there is a fee there, which covers the cost of the provincial offences officers and the equipment that they use and the overhead of the building, etc. The charge for the Ministry of Transportation is to allow access to the license plate information. So there's a small fee there. The budget request that we put in was based on processing charges under the Provincial Offences Act. So in the report, you'll see an expense related to Halton Court services. So once the Joint Processing Center, the Provincial Offences Officer looks at the images and issues a valid ticket and mails it to the registered owner, well then things move into the to Halton Court Services, who file and process all of the charges and deal with the distribution of the revenues. And obviously anybody who chooses to dispute the ticket, then Halton Court Services manages those court appointments. The revenue that you see in the report, that number is an estimate based on the number of charges that were permitted annually. Each municipality is capped on the number of charges that you can process per year. And currently the cap for Oakville is 5,000 charges. So that $360,000 revenue is based on an estimate of 5,000 charges per year. And when you combine those expenses that I just described with that revenue, that's where we come up with a net annual cost of about $225,000.
I appreciate the details. So we can't put, if we moved ahead, we can't put our program out for tender or to seek other suppliers. Everything's locked in
through your Mayor Burton, that's correct. We're in the second year of a 5-year agreement, so it will come up for renewal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. We have Councillor Chisholm and Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of questions with regard to the mobile camera units, and I just want to make sure we're clear on this. Right now, we have radar display units, mobile units. They're not the same as the new camera mobiles. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's correct. They're different. The mobile radar display signs that we have are just simply advising motorists of the speed that they're traveling at, whereas these mobile cameras take an image of the license plate of vehicles that are exceeding the speed limit and result in tickets.
Okay, so the question is, how many of those radar just display units, mobile units, do we have in our inventory at this point in time?
Currently, we only have one that moves around. Yeah.
Okay, so is that going to be obsolete now? If our program continues in the way I think it's going to go, that would make that obsolete?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I'm not sure it would make it obsolete. I think it would still have a use in certain locations.
Okay. And my last question is on the finance side of it. I'm just following up on Councilor Giddings' questions. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Martin, but with respect to looking at the budget, I was on the anticipation we would at least break even on this program. It might be the capital costs up front first, and it might alleviate into a neutral net as time goes on. Do you see this happening once we get into the fourth and fifth year? We'd be more on the neutral end. We're not spending more tax money on chasing these things.
Through you, Mayor Burton, I think the only part of the equation that would bring it close to break even is if the cap on the number of annual charges were to change down the road. That's really the limiting factor. And that there's a limit on that because the Joint Processing Center, as I said, this is a provincial program. They're already running 2 shifts. They only have a certain number of provincial offenses officers. There's just a limit to the number of charges that can be processed annually throughout the whole province.
The question has to be asked of, and I think council has to look at this too, is that form follows function. We have all the functions you place in the report, but it seems the form has not been established with the province with respect to the mirroring of the functions that we want to do. So I'm not totally convinced this thing's a total program that's ready to go. There's parts of the puzzle still need to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Next, Councillor O'Meara.
Mayor Burton, may I add on to one of the responses, if that's
Council
right?
Director Stevens would like to amplify Mr. McGuire's answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Burton, through you. Just to Councillor Chisholm's question about the radar speed display signs and versus the cameras, the mobile cameras. As Mr. McGuire mentioned, we do have one mobile radar speed display sign. It's trailer mounted. It moves around. We keep it in different locations, for a couple of weeks each time and move it through town. But we also do have the stationary radar speed display signs that will continue to remain in place as part of our program through the implementation of automated speed enforcement. We may look at redeploying some of them if they are in areas that are also going to get a radar speed an automated speed enforcement camera. But at this point, those tools are expected to remain within our toolbox for traffic calming and education.
Ms. Stevens, Director, you might want to tell the number of those stationary signs. That would assist what the councillor was after, I think.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Mayor Burton. So we do have, we did add them at 20 school zones in 2020. So that is 40 signs. We have them in both directions. We also have 17 signs that are used as sort of a first step in our traffic calming program. And those do rotate, but they remain in place for 9 to 12 months as that first education step in our traffic calming program. So between the mounted sign on the trailer, the 40 signs that are stationary and remain in place, and the 17 that rotate, we have 58 signs in our inventory.
There you go. Now on to Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have two questions I'd like to raise at this point here, and it does have to do with the community safety zones. The criteria, I'm curious about the criteria. Why would we be monitoring a 24-hour traffic volume for a community safety zone? I mean, what's the benefit of knowing what traffic's going on at 4 or 5 in the morning or 3 in the morning with regards to creating safe communities, which are predominantly from 8 in the morning till 8 or 9 at night? What's the value of factoring in the nighttime vehicles when we're trying to get community safety?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that 24-hour volume is more about how the data is collected with road tubes where we can get a complete picture. And it's essentially to compare residents saying, well, my street is busier than another street. I mean, that is just one of the measures that we can compare.
Well, I know it's a measure you can compare, but so by that rationale, the street that actually might be a thoroughfare through traffic that might have more volume in the evenings would show up as a higher percentage as opposed to, I'm just trying to figure out why we include that. Why wouldn't we just factor in daytime use and gauge that against itself and in other areas rather than including nighttime counts?
Through Mayor Burton, as I said, the 24-hour volume is typically a number that we use for various, traffic engineering comparisons. It's just a typical number that is used, and it's more about the ease of collecting the data. That's how our contractor collects it for us and presents it to us.
Okay, I'll leave that one there for a minute then. And just with regards to your community safety zones. So I know that we'll put them in a list, and every September we'll review, requests for community safety zones. So right now we would so for a couple wards, I think Ward 3 only has 2 zones. Ward 1 has 3 zones. So that camera would just be rotating between the exact same 3 places. Is that how that would work until we figure out where a new community safety zone might go?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the rotation schedule within each ward, we have yet to determine. As we say in the report, that would be done in consultation with the ward councillors in terms of frequency.
But it would just be in the CSZs we've already got outlined. There's no place outside of those that we'd be rotating those cameras in for the next, a year and a half maybe, or until your review next September would be finished?
That's correct. As we anticipate that once we do our review, the third quarter of next year, we'll be adding additional community safety zones, and that adds to the number of locations that cameras could be placed. The other component, if we're like other municipalities who have ASE programs, most of them have expanded compared to their initial deployment, the number of cameras.
Okay, yeah, and I appreciate that. Just speaking for Ward 1, Councillor Robertson for the past 4 years, but for me, I've heard dozens of complaints on the same street for 8 years, and this camera is going to do nothing for those people who we've been trying to help for 8 years with speeding issues. And places showed up as a CSZ that I had no clue was even, never had a complaint, never had anything. So I'm a little perplexed in terms of how one showed up in places that we've been asking and begging for years now are out of the box on that one. So, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. We can review next September and come back with hopefully some ability to help those neighborhoods who just continue to ask for it. My question now, just second of all, relates to communications. We always have difficulty trying to reach people. And I know we've got signs and website and social media and AGMs and residences and these sorts of things. But even today I received a letter from the town of Oakville about my upcoming property tax, and we all get notice of assessments. Why can we not put a message on those pieces of mailed information that every single homeowner gets in this town that would let them know that this is coming and this is about to happen? Would that be something we could we could do to ensure that a piece of mail gets delivered to every resident who owns a home here, letting them know this is happening?
Through you, Mayor Burton. Yes, we're working very closely with corporate communications, and after this evening, we're going to be getting into the details of what that education plan would look like, and we can certainly take that back.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. Every time we renew our stickers, we get a little piece of paper from the MTO, and on the back, it has new laws that have come into effect, and that's basically your fair warning. So anybody who says, I never saw, or I never got, or I didn't receive, we can always point and say that letter was sent to your home, and if you paid your taxes, you got it. So that would be great if we could look into that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. McGuire, can you perhaps answer a question about the traffic count technique? I'm imagining that rubber tube that you lay across the road and the car goes over it and something goes click. Is the time of passage also recorded when you record the click?
In some cases, we're recording the volume and the speed, and in some cases, even the classification of the vehicle. So the short answer is yes.
So you actually know when the traffic, not just how much, but you know when it is.
Correct.
Thank you. So I think that will help everybody on council and in the public to understand that part. Councillor Knoll and then Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. McGuire. I just have some questions with respect to enforcement. I understand the important aspect, a critical aspect of automated enforcement as part of the program, and I'm a supporter of that initiative. But I'm curious about the discussions with the Halton Regional Police Service in respect to, I guess, their acceptance, their expectations for enforcement. You mentioned that they could be potentially handing out information cards. Can you maybe elaborate on what those conversations entailed, and if you got any feedback from them on this initiative?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we specifically met with Halton Regional Police representatives regarding the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit implementation, and essentially their response was that they realize that the engineering component is the town's responsibility, and that they are willing to enforce whatever speed limits the town approves. The only caveat being, of course, that their resources in that regard can be stretched fairly thin, but they had no concerns with the enforcing the 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit on locals and minor collectors. And similarly with automated speed enforcement, they understand that it's a program that is already in operation in many municipalities in Ontario and is coming to Oakville. Obviously, in a way, it helps make their job a bit easier in that it's meant to really replicate the officer in a cruiser with a radar gun, and it saves them some resources.
Yeah, I realize that the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as the Police Boards Association, have both endorsed automated enforcement in the communities. I think my question was more along the lines of, did you get any indication that this would enhance enforcement on the part of the police service, or they would simply just be able to enforce the same degree they were able to enforce the previous speed limit?
Through you, Mayor Burton, based on our discussions, it was more the latter, that it really wouldn't impact their resources that they could apply to speed enforcement. So
in that case, the enhancement of enforcement really comes from the automated system. Therefore, that's where the thrust of the enforcement would come from, as opposed to expectations that police would be able to do more.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McGuire. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. McGuire, just to get a quick question. I'm trying to understand the order of magnitude of 5,000. So having a limit of 5,000 per year, what are we, with Halton Regional Police Service, as they give out tickets for speeding infractions, how many infractions, you may not have this answer, but it'd be interesting to see, how many infractions are happening currently in community safety zones versus the other other local or minor roads? Because I'm trying to understand if these are going to be limited just to the community safety zones, how will that impact enforcement in the other areas?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I don't have those numbers at my fingertips. However, we have been in touch with Halton Police and their Project Safe Start, where they have indicated that once they've summarized some of the data that they will share it with us, and I could certainly pass that along.
Because it would just be interesting if 5,000 is a very low number compared to how many infractions are normally given. Are we really making an impact? Or if more and more municipalities come on board, can that 5,000 then be increased? Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to, ensure the safety of our residents by having speed or people not speeding. And if this is an effective tool, it sounds like we should be using, potentially more if that's the case. But if you're capped at the 5,000, what would be the point depending on an annual number in a normal year?
Through Mayor Burton, agreed that the 5,000 number seems relatively low and it won't take long to get there. Like I said in my presentation, the experience of other municipalities, the good news is that motorists don't know whether the camera is operational or not. And studies that they've done outside of the operational hours show that just the presence of the camera has had a positive impact on operating speeds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. Mr. McGuire, do you know if the 5,000 cap is in addition to what municipalities already put through the provincial courts?
Through you, Mayor Burton, my understanding is the 5,000 is dedicated to automated speed enforcement. So yes, it's over and above.
Separate and above what we already do.
Correct.
Good. I hope that's helpful to the members and the public to have that clarity. All right, I don't see any more questions, and so I think, Council, you'd like me to call the delegations. I don't see any objections, so Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations?
Yes, the first delegation is Joseph Verratti.
Welcome, Mr. Barati. Council looks forward to your information. Please unmute yourself if you haven't already, and welcome to the meeting.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, we hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes,
Welcome to Zoom.
thank you.
Please.
Well, thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, councillors. I want to make an introduction to my speech, if I may call it so, because this whole conversation, this whole dialogue or topic seems in the last instance to be reduced to income and expense judgment or budget. How much can we charge more, and what does it cost us to charge presently, and what it would take to charge more than 5,000, for instance. And this is a very frightening dialogue to me. Do you hear me? Hello?
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 Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Please continue.
It's a very, very sad dialogue for me because at the tender age of 28, I escaped a totalitarian dictatorship and risking my life. And I am extremely sad to realize that basically all the measures which you are contemplating are directed to limit again certain freedoms, among others, the freedom of circulation, the freedom of moving around, and penalizing that. Just to ask you a couple of questions. You accentuated the Oakville's 21 designated community safety zones near elementary schools, correct?
Sir, I'm not, it's not our custom to
mentioned-
engage in
repeatedly
Q&A.
mentioned- Sorry for,
If
you
you
repeatedly
have,
mentioned
please
safety zone.
just provide your information.
Well, my information is that I speak fluently 5 languages: English, French, German, Hungarian, Romanian, and conversational Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. I did a brief canvassing of the world countries with these official languages for a total approximately of 2.7 billion people. But my research did not produce any major urban agglomeration except for restricted hospital and school zones, some of them only within specific time, daily or timely spans with a 40-kilometer speed limit. None, absolutely none in a 2.7 billion world population. Okay? I could not locate any studies or statistics substantiating that an urban speed reduction from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour would lower the rate of automotive accidents, pedestrian injuries, or fatalities, or even influencing public driving habits. Do you have such studies? If you do, please share them with me. Why the additional restriction on our lives? Or why the reduction to only 40 kilometers per hour? Why not say 25 kilometers per hour? It's just another feel-good measure or a real necessary restriction of our freedom of movement? A vast experience is telling us by now that the estimated cost, $36,675. I don't know how the last $75 were figured out, will increase during implementation. Basically, already we are talking about $585,000, but expected to generate about $360,000. So ultimately, this whole system, this whole procedure is reduced to a, I don't know, income statement. I'm extremely, how should I put it, nervous about it. It is somehow, as I said, what was the, and this is a direct question, what was the statistic of people hit or people killed in Oakville's 21 designated community safety zones in order to justify the increase of these restrictive measures, in fact, reducing the speed from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour? How many fatalities, how many injuries did we experience which would justify this kind of restrictions? Do we have statistics in this, let's say, area, in this? And you have? I would like to see them. And what is our guarantee that the 7 mobile photo radar speed cameras added will remain only near the elementary schools and not be positioned at much higher traffic density locations for more ticket revenue, as you call it? I am extremely, how should I put it, uncomfortable being reminded of bad, extremely bad memories from the jurisdictional or, how should I put it, administrative system which I risked my life escaping from. I'm a little bit, how should I put it, apologetic about being so emotional about it. But this is a real fact. You are quoting more and more figures about signed agreements with equipment producers, about 5,000 charges per year, hopefully to increase the figures in order to get more fees and more, how should I, penalties. I don't know, is it something being corrected? Is it something being achieved by the reduction from the 50 to 40 kilometers per hour, or it's only a balance sheet exercise? At any rate, I still insist of having the stats on which you are basing and proposing this speed reduction. Having the stats of how many people have been killed or injured in the 21 designated community safety zones, and if not, it means that the 50 kilometers limit is still doing its job. Why reduce it at the horrendous expenses which you just mentioned? Let me explain something as an engineer. I happen to be an engineer also, okay?
Mr. Virati,
And
you have,
MBA.
engineer or not, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, the minute left is if you realize that the speed reduction is adding to congestion. A road is like a pipeline. The slower the flow, less cars get through in a specific time window. Reducing the speed will result in less cars, and the more people want to get where they are going, they will put out more, more fuel consumption, because they will go slower. More fuel consumption means more environmental impact, more gases, more pollution, more emissions. So going slower, it will add to these environmental negative impacts, which we these days are trying to combat, are trying to avoid.
Thank you, Mr. Virati.
By lowering the speed.
Mr. Virati,
This
thank you
will
very much for your time and your information. It's time to call the next delegation. Thank you very much, sir. Councillor O'Meara? Councillor O'Meara, you'll need to unmute if you want to be heard.
I got it. I'm so apt to make sure I raise my hand first. I forget to click I lower my hand. I forget to click the one. Sorry. If Mr. Virati would assent to the clerk to share his email with me, I'd be happy to send him the report I passed around in January on the reduction of speeds and also on the City of Edmonton's pilot project they did when they reduced speeds, how much time it saved residents. So if the clerk can maybe connect with him, I'd be happy to share that information if I can get his email. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Nancy Robertson, representing Chartwell Maple Grove Residents Association.
Welcome, Ms. Robertson. Council looks forward to your information.
There, I think we're all set up. Good evening, Mayor, Town Councilors. My name is Nancy Robertson, and I'm here on behalf of the Chartwell Maple Grove Residents Association. We support Town Council's efforts to reduce speed on our residential streets. For the many years that I've been involved in community activism, there has never been a public meeting where someone does not ask about the speed of the traffic on their residential street. At the CMGRA annual general meetings, we always have a resident submit a question about traffic. Further, we understand that speed on local streets is a concern. Am I still muted?
No, we're hearing you just fine.
Okay, I just got this message from Ted. Okay, sorry. At the CMGRA annual general meetings, we always have a resident submit a question about traffic. Further, we understand that speed on local streets is a concern across our town. From what we have learned, the difference between 50 kilometers an hour and 40 kilometers an hour can mean life or death. For this reason alone, we support the town staff's neighborhood traffic safety report and the suggestions therein. We would like to take this opportunity to comment on some of the specifics noted in the report. We agree that option one would be the better one and are happy that it turns out to be the more cost effective. We know that enforcement is the key in any traffic change. Could we set up speed enforcement blitzes at the very start of the program that just issue warnings? Further, we would like to encourage regular enforcement blitzes on an ongoing basis be included in the planning and maintenance of the new program. CMGRA commits to doing whatever it can to support the communications efforts of the new program. We are happy to see a more structured approach to community safety zones and are not opposed to expanding these zones beyond schools and parks where necessary. For instance, all along a key school safety route. These are the routes that have been identified as key routes for students getting to and from school on bikes or on their own 2 feet. We do have concerns with the plans for the automated speed enforcement program. We just don't believe that 7 cameras are enough to make a difference. We also think that the community needs to be aware of the new ASE program, and then fear will be a great motivator. Perhaps this is an opportunity to encourage parents to stop driving their children to school. Finally, it is a true bonus that the lowering of the speed limit will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We know this was not a key intention, but what an extraordinary effect. As we have said many times before, CMGRA endorses any town direction that has a positive effect on climate change. Thank you to the town staff for this report. Thank you to Town Council for initiating this new program. CMGRA is happy to endorse the new traffic program with the comments that we are respectfully making. And further, you can count on us to do whatever we can to support the new program with our residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson, for your information and your offer. Don't see any questions. So, Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
The next delegation is George Kiricek.
Mr. Kiricek, Council welcomes you and looks forward to your information. Please unmute yourself if you haven't already and share your information. He's gone. All right. Then we need the next delegation, Madam Clerk.
Okay, the next delegation is Ted Hogan from the West River Residents Association.
Welcome, Mr. Hogan. Council looks forward to your information, and please unmute yourself and share it if you haven't already managed to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Okay, sorry about that. I got all sorts of strange messages on my screen. Well, thank you, Mayor Burton and councillors. Let me start out by saying that in general, the West River Residents Association Board supports this report. It's a huge step in the right direction, and I especially want to commend staff for their work on it. It's important for everyone to note that this isn't new or radical. It's actually Oakville playing catch up with many other municipalities across the country. In fact, many towns and cities have 30-kilometer speed limits on many of their residential streets. I had just a few brief comments on the report. I will keep it simple because a lot of people want to talk about this. The 7 mobile cameras, I agree that there should be more. I agree with Nancy, way to go. I'm just wondering about the designation of 1 per ward. Is there a reason, and I know I shouldn't ask questions, I'm just throwing it out there. Is there a reason why why the councillors are involved in setting locations rather than leaving up to town staff to put them in the areas where there is the most need? Shouldn't staff be given the responsibility to make those kinds of important decisions without what some might say is political interference? Next point is the implementation strategy of 40 kilometers. Unlike Nancy, the previous speaker, I actually would favor option 2. Option 1 is certainly cheaper and easier, but is it really going to promote behavioral change, which is what we are trying to do here? The best way to alter habits is to remind drivers constantly and consistently, as much as I'd like to think that town communications can get people to understand and accept the changes. There are limitations to any communications, and certainly the tools that the town has, as extensive as they are and as impressive as they sound in the report, are not going to get to everyone. Saturation of signs will be the most effective communications tool available. And as far as the communications plan goes, again, I would offer up not just West River's organization to help with the messaging, but I think you'd hear from all of the RAs that they're very supportive of this and will do whatever we can. So make sure that we're involved, make sure that we're informed, and we will do our very best to support whatever communications we need to make this work. As far as the 500 offenses goes annually, I think you have to ask yourself, what's the real priority here? Is it public safety or resources? If it's resources, then let's find a way to deal with that and not make it a reason to say no or to go slowly on this. I do want to say that the revised speed thresholds are a very, very positive move. If the police enforce it that way, there have to be clear directions about the police enforcing those. In the past, we've had in West River a 50-kilometer limit. We've been told by the police that they won't start ticketing until the drivers are going over 10 kilometers over, and it's usually 12. The reality of a 50 speed limit here is really 62. So, I mean, the enforcement, I think, is going to be absolutely vital to making this work. Let me finish by restating that West River Residents Association supports this. It's a major step in the right direction, and I want to again thank staff for their work on it. Councillors, please remember that none of this is groundbreaking. If anything, we're lagging. All this has been done right across the country by safety-conscious municipalities. I'm sure I've heard them. I'm sure you've all heard about the arguments about how this penalizes good drivers. The response to that is, really? What penalties? This is an initiative that targets unsafe outliers. Research clearly shows that slower speeds make roads safer. That's pretty straightforward, and I don't think anybody on this Zoom call would argue with that. Please ask yourself, does someone's need to get to work or the store or a kid's hockey game a few minutes faster really supersede the community's rights to safer roads? You have to decide your priority. It's quite simple. Rights for you to drive fast or reduce speeds in safer neighborhoods for everyone. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hogan, for your information. We have questions from Councillors Robertson and Councillors Robertson and Hazlitt-Thiel. Councillor Robertson, you're first.
Thank you. I just wanted to point something out in terms of Mr. Hogan's statement about the police upholding the speed thresholds. Those thresholds were not designated for police. I believe they are meant for traffic calming studies. So I just wanted to make sure that that isn't something that is an expectation that police would have to pull someone over in a 40 when they hit 45, that we're not deeming what police do in their job with this. That is for our own staff's traffic calming studies.
Thank you, Councillor. The province of Ontario has organized the municipal police in such a way that no politician can order a chief to do any form of enforcement. It's entirely up to the police. So thank you for that. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, Ted, for coming out. I just, a couple of questions about the pilot, because there's been some questions raised about the data that came out of the West River pilot. And as somebody who's on the street working and was an advocate for it, are there things that should have been or could be done better or differently to highlight or make the pilot more successful? And I use that word loosely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. One of the things that we found was that we needed more signage. On Queen Mary, all of the entrances to the community were posted with 40 kilometers. Now that led everybody to Queen Mary, which was the major traffic route. We had people on the feeder roads, Riverside, etc., who didn't realize that the 40 kilometers applied to them. And we had originally talked to town staff and asked for some signs to be put up so that people would I don't know why they weren't, but they weren't. We've talked to the town, and the staff have said that, yes, that's something that we can do, that they can do, which I think will help. There was also and the reason that I brought up the thresholds is because I have heard from Halton Regional Police that they do use those thresholds as guides to when they pull somebody over, when they give a warning, and when they give a ticket. So I understand that they're not hard and fast rules, but they are indicators that the police will use. The the speeds were, the data that was collected, and this was brought up in one of the questions earlier, the data is 24 hours, it's generalized, it doesn't reflect the key times that the traffic is a problem, which is morning and afternoon rush hour, which is the same time kids are walking to school, are waiting for their school buses, people are walking to the GO train, and after work, people are out walking their dogs or just spending time with their families. So there wasn't the recognition of key times when the increased speeding was a problem. And I think that I know there are limitations to the data collection devices that the town has, but I don't think they can be used as the singular indicator of where traffic is a problem. There are limitations. Those would be the two big things from the experience of our pilot.
Ted, thanks very much for coming out, and thanks for continuing to be a champion of public safety. I have a question, Mayor Burton, for Martin or Jill, just related to what Ted has said. Would you like me to wait on that or ask it now?
It's your privilege to ask your question whenever you want. My advice would be to hear from all the delegations and then turn to the staff. But
I'm fine with that. That's fine. I just wanted to verify. Thanks very much.
Sure. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Jennifer Wang.
Ms. Wang, welcome to the meeting. Council looks forward to your information. And if you haven't already, please unmute yourself and share your information.
Good morning to Mayor and the member of Council. My name is Jennifer, and thank you for this opportunity to speak before the Council regarding item 9.2, Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program, and I will just get into it. Could you please go to page 4? With urbanization on the rise, cities are struggling to keep up with an ever-increasing population, and bad driving behavior becomes a more pressing issue, where every year, thousands of lives are lost, millions of individuals suffer from traffic-related injuries, and countless are frustrated stuck in traffic, which resulted in $11 billion of economic loss in GTA alone in 2013, and that number is projected to grow to $15 billion loss in 2025. And 25 to 30% of this loss solely contribute to poor driving behaviors. Next slide, please. So then we talked about the problem. What about the solution? Right now, me and my co-founder are working under a startup accelerator to develop a product that will empower and facilitate residents reporting to assist cities and policing bodies with real-time enforceable and actionable data regarding traffic law violations, community safety, city maintenance, and asset management with no upfront cost to the city, in order to accelerate Vision Zero's initiative. We have a vision that the world's most innovative cities will leverage the untapped potential of their residents through crowdsourcing enforceable and analyze evidence using affordable and scalable technology that we provide. This will not only foster a culture of connectiveness and support between the resident and their municipal government, as people understand that their voices are heard by their local office in real time, provide that one-on-one education program to bad driving behaviors observed using our system, increase the city's non-tax revenue, but also, most importantly, we help city leaders to choose the right priorities to keep up with the exponential growth in population, to manage their city and roads at a lower cost, enforce with justice in mind, and make better and more confident decisions toward a zero violence road. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Yes, next slide, please. Yes. So how does it work? An unalterable and unbreakable star dash cam system will be mounted to participating residents' vehicle. Next slide, please. This will be connected to an integrated platform that we offer so city leaders can receive real-time data and report from their residents that is up to the highest level accuracy, as all the data that we provide, that we gather from our residents, are analyzed using our deep learning model to ensure its quality. Further information are included in the slide for your review, but we would like to hear your feedback on this idea. And we want to have a better understanding of how valuable are these data for the safety of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Next delegation is Terry Ball and Elizabeth Chalmers, representing Joshua Creek Residents Association.
Ms. Ball and Ms. Chalmers, Council welcomes you and looks forward to your information. Please unmute yourself if you have not already and begin.
Good evening. Hi there. Can you hear me now? Or Terry, you're on?
We can hear you well.
Okay, sorry. Somehow I was being disconnected from the meeting. So I'm Elizabeth Chalmers. I'm president of the Joshua Creek Residents Association. And with me is Terry Ball, director on JCRA. And Terry delegated on this issue back in January 2021. So we're both here tonight. Myself to the delegation and to answer any questions that you might have. The JCRA appreciates the opportunity to delegate council again on this important issue of traffic safety in our neighborhoods. And we thank you, Mayor Burton, all of our councillors and town staff for the many hours spent in consideration of residents' concerns regarding speeding in the town of Oakville. We'd also like to compliment staff on the integrated approach that they've taken to this issue, which I think will increase effectiveness of the overall program. As we delegated to council back in January of this year, JCRA agrees with the recommendation that the default speed should be 40 kilometers an hour on minor collector and local roads, which comprise the vast majority of the roads in residential neighborhoods. We also agree with and support the focus on a comprehensive education plan to ensure driver awareness and adherence to the reduced speed limit over an extended period of time, as it will likely require a concerted effort to change driver behavior to slow down to 40 kilometers an hour. Our agreement and support are in part driven by the research we undertook earlier this year and research that we heard from Councillor Mera in January that shows that making this change will contribute to a safer road network for all users. As well, one such study from the World Health Organization demonstrated that setting and enforcing speed limits are important and effective measures in reducing traffic injuries, but they only have a short impact unless accompanied by sustained education and awareness blitzes. So let me take a few minutes to discuss the specifics of the implementation of reducing the default speed limit. So after reviewing the implementation options presented in the report, JCR certainly agrees that the cost of option 2 is excessively high. However, we do have concerns that the signage notifying drivers of this change per option 1 will be insufficient to alter the driving in practice. The recommendation of signage in option 1 seems to be primarily cost and ease of implementation driven, as the table on page 6 makes a strong case for option 1. Under this option, with the new default speed of 40 kilometers an hour, there will be 179 posted signs for 40 kilometers. That's only 12 more than the current 167, and that increase is only due to the addition of changing the gateway signs from 50 to 40. Also under option 1, there will be 165 50 kilometer an hour zones. So almost the same number of signs that are intended to be creating awareness and posting 40 kilometers an hour as the new default speed. Option 2 provides for 3,021 40K signs and 287 50K signs at a greater cost and a longer implementation. So the obvious conclusion is to recommend option 1 when faced with such a large number of new signs, their cost, and the time to implement. However, in our opinion, the effectiveness of option 1 is questionable given the small number of signs to be posted, which will almost equal the number of 50K signs. As a result, more media, more public education, and more time to change driving practice will be required. These are cost and time factors involved in option 1, which are not expressed in the staff report. Additionally, non-residents, visitors to Oakville, including the many delivery service drivers from Amazon and like companies that we see now in residential neighborhoods, are less likely to adhere to the slower speed limits if the signage is minimal. We would like to see consideration given to an option 3, which would provide for more 40 km/h signage than option 1, but certainly not at the level of option 2. That would provide for continued public education beyond the 6-month period, such as those information or awareness blitzes noted in other studies, and for a shorter review time for reporting back to council on the success of implementing the new default speed limits versus annually. With respect to the automated speed enforcement, we support restricting their use to community safety zones, since that puts them in the priority locations where they will have the biggest impact. Reviewing the impact of the ASEs on the speed limits and the cost of that program should be undertaken within a specified time frame after the launch to help determine overall effectiveness and any changes that might be required. Some other traffic calming measures that were noted in the report, JCRA would support the use of stop signs at intersections near community safety zones to not just slow down traffic, but to stop it and improve the safety for pedestrians accessing the community safety zones. And with respect to the pedestrian crossovers, it seems to us that part of the priority ranking for an intersection to receive a crossover should take into account the proximity or lack thereof of an alternative safe crossing so that residents or pedestrians can safely cross intersections as needed. Vision Zero sounds very promising. It sounds long overdue, and JCRA looks forward to hearing results and to participating in feedback as requested. And then we had a couple of concerns that were specific to the JCR neighborhood. When reviewing the Appendix A, the local and minor collector road network map, we noted that Devon Road was not designated as a minor collector road and that it was assigned variable speed limits. This is a concern because Devon is a well-used road. It has a community safety zone, it has a high school, and it's used to access 4 public schools and further on to 2 private schools. So significant numbers of young pedestrians and young cyclists along that road. We were pleased that earlier today, town staff confirmed through Councillor Hazlettfield that Devon is a minor collector and would be eligible to have the 40 kilometer speed limit along those parts where it is currently 50. JCRA supports a consistent 40 kilometer speed along the full length of Devon Road, and we would ask that the map be revised accordingly to prevent future confusion. Ensuring the speed is consistent on the minor collector and local roads in residential neighborhoods is important for drivers, and may well be that the map needs to be reviewed for roads in other parts of the town for the same issue. And finally, we thank staff for noting the impact on Transit Route 11 and for reviewing how that can be addressed going forward. We would be pleased to be part of that review. As always, JCRA would be pleased to be part of any communication to our residents with respect to speed limits, ASEs, whatever is needed. And we thank you again for your time and consideration on this very important issue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chalmers, for your information. I see no questions, Council. So Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Carolyn Mcminn from the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association.
Welcome, Ms. Mcminn. Council looks forward to your information. If you haven't already, please unmute yourself and begin.
Good evening, everyone. I'm hoping that you can all hear me now. It just took a moment to rejoin the meeting there.
We can hear you well.
My name is Carolyn Mcminn, and I'm the president of the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association. Mayor Burton and members of council, we applaud this program and congratulate the councillors and the staff on an excellent decision to implement this neighbourhood traffic safety program. We're keenly interested in all 6 components of it and the tools that will be implemented to control the speeding in our neighbourhood. Going forward, we would love to be engaged in further public consultation, and we offer our assistance in communicating this with our residents. The following 2 matters are the ones that have jumped out at us as being the most important. Simply by reducing the speed limit to 40 kilometres an hour will not actually reduce the speeding. Signage will be an issue, as will broaden consistent enforcement with the Halton Regional Police Service. To that end, identifying additional community safety zones and adopting the automatic speed enforcement program with fines issued under the AMPS are measures which we wholeheartedly support. However, we think 7 mobile cameras, with 1 allocated to each ward, seem far too few for the job. We believe they should be allocated based on identified speed reduction needs rather than geography alone. We note the comments under the ASE proposed operation, which imply acquisition of further cameras, including fixed cameras, once we have gained experience from the initial program. However, we're concerned about the costing not seeming to allow for the growth of this program. And our second point is the proposed communications plan seems to focus mainly on publicising the reduced speed limit. We respectfully suggest that the plan be expanded to include publicising the automatic speed enforcement cameras as well. We see no likelihood of changes to drivers' behaviour until they internalise the penalties of speeding. In other words, hit them in the hip pocket. Fines work. As the population growth in Midtown is realised, and as our demographic cycles to younger families, as a rejuvenated downtown attracts more visitors, and as walking throughout our neighbourhood continues to grow, the need for this program will become more and more evident. We look forward to its implementation, and we would like to assist you in any way that we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McMinn. All right, I see no questions. I believe that, Madam Clerk, is that the end of the delegations? All right, Council, we can thank the delegations and restrict the matter to the Council table. Are there questions for staff? Councillor Dudek. Councillor Dudek, if you would unmute yourself and start over again, it would probably help everybody.
Okay, sorry. I was going to propose a revision to the staff recommendation in the report, but I believe Councillor Haslett Thiel had a question she was patiently waiting to ask.
Well, it's in order for you to put on the floor your motion, and then it's in order for her to ask questions and to proceed. So I'm happy to accept your motion. Councillor Haslett Thiel, if Councillor Dudek is done, you're next.
Sir, Your Worship, just point of order.
She didn't call out the motion. So I'm prepared. Kathy, I'm prepared to be very patient, and I appreciate your collegiality.
Okay.
Perhaps you could read out the motion, though.
I'd be pleased to. Thank you. Everything basically remains the same, save and except the following. And I don't know, Mayor Burton, I know members of council have seen this revision, but perhaps if it can be put on camera so those at home can see it, or?
Thank you for the suggestion. Let's take a second while the clerk puts that on the camera. Which of you? Okay, Jess is going to put it up in a second.
Okay, there you have it. As I say, there's only 1, 2, 3 differences to the existing one, and that would be that 2A reference council defers approval of the implementation plan contained in this report for the 48 kilometer speed limit, including changing the townwide default speed limit from 50K to 40K until the work described below in B is completed and reported to council. B, that staff continue monitoring the traffic patterns and speeds in the existing West River and Heritage 40K pilot areas to collect 4 full seasons of data beginning this spring to explore and account for potential changes to traffic patterns due to the pandemic. And the other addition is down under F, and that is council approves that the ASC program comprised 14 mobile cameras in 2022, with the increase of 7 mobile cameras adding the cost of $246,596 for a total net ASC estimated program cost of $471,349. Do you want me to speak to it at this point, Your Worship, or should I wait until others?
Normally, as the mover, you have the privilege to speak to your motion, and then the meeting begins, so to speak.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. There is no question, that we have a speeding issue, The problem I have is answering questions I've received as to the data that qualifies for a town-wide blanket 40-kilometer reduction to the speed limit. We all have specific areas in Councillor Chisholm's ward, West River, certain elements in West Harbor have speeding problems. And I dare say there's several other councillors who have. I know Councillor Robertson and O'Meara have others as well. The problem is, much as I love and applaud our residents associations, there's a large amount of our community that does not have the benefit of residential associations to be their spokesperson, so to speak. And the fact that we've had so many questions in regards to some of the implementation plan, whether it be the signage, whether it be the enforcement, big issue for me, the enforcement, because any change we make, unless we have enforcement, the changes are mute. It's not going to realize any kind of a change. Signage, as I say, has been a big issue. I've seen a lot of people making notation on surveys and sites regarding the fact that just having a small notice is not going to cut it. If you're doing something this large, blanket across the community, you need to have sufficient signage, communication, etc. The data that several people reference is not Oakville data. It's data, and I'm not diminishing the data they're providing. But until such time as we have hard data that we can stand firm and say and point to, I think moving forward until we have that data, we're really not doing the plan any service by moving ahead without having at least 4 seasons and not something that is through a pandemic, as was raised by Councillor Giddings. You know, we've had several things that have been skewed in regards to the pandemic, and it's not a realistic capturing of the data. So as I say, until such time as I think that we've had this 4 seasons of data retrieval, and also looking, good point people had regarding 24-hour. Maybe we have to look at that as well. But I do think in regards to moving forward with the implementation of this right now, it is not warranted until we can prove to the community we have hard data to, and not just a perception, not just listening to somebody saying that this is what's going on. Like I say, I'm sorry, that's my feeling on it, and I'll leave it with the council whether or not they feel they can support that.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. I have a speakers list of Councillor Haslett-Deal, Councillor Robertson, Councillor O'Meara, and Councillor Grant, and Councillor Elgar. Councillor Haslett-Deal, you're first.
Sir, Your Worship, can I just ask a point of order? The first point says to defer. So are we debating a motion to defer on item A right now, or is that just a word in an amendment here? I just want to be clear on the order of what we're voting on right now. Is this a deferral on number A, or is this just a recommendation that has the word defer in it?
This is a total package that approves pieces of the report and defers another piece of the report. And
okay, so this is not a motion to defer then.
A part of the report.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
And Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So I had a couple of questions of staff, and then I'll attempt to comment on, and I may have to come back a second time just to make sure I covered it all. So my question is for Martin or Jill. Just one of the things that's come up is how we measure speed and our protocol around that, and particularly that we use a 24 to 48 hour window, and it doesn't, or maybe you could clarify for it, doesn't seem to specify that there might have been speeding between 2:30 and 6:30, and there was not much happening after that fact in terms of speeding. Do we have access to technology that can give us more, I'll call precise speed data, which would highlight the speed issues that we have more clearly?
Director Stevens is going to field your question.
Through Mayor Burton. So the traffic data collection equipment that we use will break down the speeds, the volumes, and in some cases the types of vehicles by hour or in smaller increments. But we do consolidate that into 24-hour, 48-hour periods for reporting, as you've mentioned. In most cases, we've been using that speed data for our traffic calming program, and our traffic calming program consists of permanent fixtures that are in place, and so we are looking at dealing with the whole package of or whole understanding of what the speed issue is. It's not, we can't really control that through physical measures by time of day, but we do recognize that there are specific times of the day where there could be problems or a greater problem depending on the location. Our traffic calming program is based on that 85th percentile speed. We want to try and get the majority, a good understanding of the majority of what's happening there. It's not been meant to try and get those 1 or 2 outliers who might be doing something 30, 40, 50 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. That's stunt driving. That's something for police enforcement, and that's why we have gone with that 48-hour timeline. In the past, we had relied on a 24-hour timeline, and received considerable comments about that not being representative of what was actually happening, that it was too short of a time. And so we did make some adjustments a couple of years ago to increase the timeline so that we were getting a more representative picture of what the problem was.
So thank you for that clarity. So on the pilots, was the data dissected in a way that would take out those highs and lows, or even, quite frankly, the lows, because the highs are the ones we're trying to get, in analyzing the speeds?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the data collection was done in the manner that I had just explained. We did not try and look at highs and lows. We were, though, impacted by the pandemic in that we had received the direction to start the pilot in October of 2019, and our goal was to report back in April of 2020 so that we could be making the changes and incorporate those into the budget process that would be happening later that year if we were to roll this out more broadly. And then, of course, our ability to do the 6 month after speed surveys was significantly impacted by the pandemic.
So if the proposed deferral occurs tonight, is supported tonight, what would change in how you're evaluating or measuring the speed? Are you saying you're going to do it the identical way, or is there ways that we can get more precise analysis of the speed?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we've heard the questions today about time of day very clearly, and certainly we can be looking at our data to see if there are different trends that are that do come through by looking at it, sort of a morning peak, afternoon peak, and on the 24-hour basis to see if there are any changes in that regard. But I think we would continue to collect the data as we always have. It's just whether or not we would just be looking at how we would report on that data and how we would analyze it.
Thank you for that. My other question is this 5,000 infractions, speeding infractions, plus as Mayor Burton pointed out, would be, we'd also end up with Halton, our normal Halton traffic violation numbers. What would that take us to in terms of total violations that could be processed?
Through you, Mayor Burton. Sorry, through you, Mayor Burton. I don't have the number of speeding tickets or other infractions that Halton Police Services would be able to issue on an annual basis. As Mr. McGuire mentioned, we have reached out to them on the Project Safe Start program, and they are compiling the data. So we do expect to have that and be able to report back at a later date, which would give an indication of the number of tickets they issued during that timeline, which we could look at to see if it could be extrapolated out over a longer period.
Because one of the questions on the floor tonight is, do we go from 7 cameras to 14? And I believe one of my other council colleagues referenced, well, if we're going to, if 5,000 plus others is, is that effort and expenditure something we should put in? Not that I'm not supportive of ASC in its totality, but it would be nice to understand what our benchmarks are. And one of the things I really did appreciate in the report was a recommendation that you would report on KPIs. I mentioned to Martin today, who was kind enough to answer some questions for me offline, that we should have that benchmark data now or soon, because that helps us be able to articulate what traffic safety has been able to accomplish to date and what the changes will make when you report again. So I just wondered if any of that data is available, whether it's the violations, et cetera. I understand that's not. And so I put that out, that to you as perhaps a takeaway. So So my only other question, Director Stevens, is the 40-kilometer signs that are in place right now, the ones that don't track, you know, they just flash in the neighborhood. I think they're the 17 that you referenced. Do we have any analysis of the difference they've made post putting them in?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So the 17 stationary signs that do rotate, before we put them in, we do speed surveys to identify that there is a need for traffic calming. Then the signs are put in, placed for approximately 9 months. When they come out, we do follow-up speed surveys to see whether or not the speeds have remained below the threshold. So, sorry, I should mention, we do a speed survey while the signs are in place to see whether they've been effective while they're operational. And then we do a follow-up speed survey after they've been removed to see if that effect continues after they're gone, if the drivers have remembered that they were used to, you know, that sign was there, what their speed had been displayed as they drove past it, and then whether that has a lasting effect.
Without asking you to recall every one, what is the general learning from implementing those 40 kilometers signage?
So through you, Mayor Burton, those signs are put up, what they could be in 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limit areas, they could be in 50-kilometer-an-hour speed limits. We've even had them on 60s. Depending on the type of the road, we have seen some cases where when the signs are in place, if the traffic volumes are high enough, it causes a bit of a platooning effect, and then there is more of a long-standing speed reduction. We've also seen in areas where people get very used to them, and they understand that they are just about displaying the speed, and so we do see the speed starting to trend back upwards when we've had them in for a longer period of time. It really has varied across different implementations of the signs in different locations across town.
But we do then have data that, if it was compiled, could be shared with council at a future date to help us with this question about, do we have enough facts that are relevant in Oakville to the benefit of a 40 and those radar signs?
Through you, Mayor Burton, certainly we can share that data. I just would also remind council that they have been in, as I mentioned, in a number of different speed limit areas, not just in the 40K zones.
But if they've achieved one of the objectives, which I think all our my council colleagues would agree with, which is let's reduce speeding on the road, whether it went from 60 to 50 or 50 to 40, it's demonstrating, is it moving directionally downward where people feel safer, is my only point.
Yes, thank you.
I guess my only other question is around traffic calming. And so one of the frustrations of residents is that they cannot understand that a road is got, people are going 56, 57, but they're not at the 85th percentile. Forgive me if I've got my one digit wrong or whatever, but it just doesn't quite hit the mark. And so they've gone through a fairly lengthy process, albeit you've made improvements in the last year and a half, I believe. They've gone through lengthy
Councillor, you're no longer speaking about the matter before us. If you're talking about how we do traffic calming, our bylaw limits each member to 10 minutes. I've let you go beyond that. I think I should ask, everybody else on council seems to want to speak to this. I'm looking at the raised hands. I should ask council if they want to waive the bylaw to allow you to continue, or are you nearly done?
I'm nearly done my question.
Thank you.
So the reason I'm asking about traffic calming, Jill, is because it is a catalyst to why people are interested in 40 kilometers and believe that it will allow them to feel that their road network is safer. So is there any other changes in the traffic calming protocol? Because in your report, which is in the recommendations, you're saying that you will defer, people will have to wait till 2023 in order to get some of that traffic calming. So is there anything else that can be done in the interim to address those concerns?
Through you, Mayor Burton. As outlined in the report, we have 18 locations that we're actively reviewing for traffic calming right now. With the public consultation design process and implementation of that, we expect that that will take us into 2022 to complete that work. So we will be proceeding with some traffic calming now and into 2022. With respect to new locations, however, lowering the speed limit and lowering the threshold. So we lowered the threshold last December, and then made the resolution to lower the speed limit in January. That has significantly increased the number of sites that were already on our list to either to be investigated or had been investigated and didn't meet the threshold with the previous 10 kilometers an hour over, but do meet it with the 5 kilometers an hour over the lowered speed limit. So we wanted to really focus on the ones that we knew were meeting the threshold regardless of the speed limit change, to get those, because those are higher operating speeds already. We want to make sure we're addressing those. And then we needed to understand how big the problem continued to be after the speed limit was changed, and whether there was a noticeable or appreciable change in driver behavior that might change the need for traffic calming on those streets. We do expect that we will have to look at how we prioritize that volume of new requests that have come in. They do come in on an ad hoc basis right now. And so we need to really get a handle on that and put them in an orderly fashion that will allow us to implement them in a structured and predictable manner for our residents and for our staff.
So thank you very much for that explanation, and thank you to my colleagues for their indulgence. At the appropriate time, Mayor Burton, I'd like to ask for an amendment to the motion on the floor.
This is the appropriate time.
I would like to ask that a community safety zone be added on Reynolds Street from Pine to George's Square, which is right by our community center, and several important large parks. And I think that it would qualify, and it's an important safety area for us.
Thank you for the amendment. Does anyone in council wish to discuss the amendment, or may I put it to a vote? I'll put it to a vote. Is there anyone who objects to the amendment? Councillor O'Meara, are you objecting?
Sorry, Your Worship. I am. I don't think we should be doing this piecemeal right now. I mean, well, we'll have 7 wards. Sorry. Okay.
You can feel that way if you want, but it's in order for her to make an amendment, and I'll record you in opposition if you like, but apart from you, I see no objection. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel's amendment carries and is now part of the item before us. And Councillor O'Meara, good news. Let me see my list. It just disappeared. The next speaker is Councillor Robertson.
I am going to wait for the results of what comes up before I raise my hand again, so I will defer right now.
Alrighty. Councillor O'Meara, you're next.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, my council colleagues, for that. I'm adding some streets now to get community safety zones right now, which is what I was hoping to avoid, but nevertheless, we'll have a bunch of amendments going forward here. Firstly, Your Worship, I'm hoping to separate items 2A, 2B, and 2F to vote separately on those. Just briefly to speak to 2F, because that's the easiest one for me. One ward only has 2 community safety zones. Well, now 3 if this goes, that was approved. Our ward only has 3. From the way I understand it, the cameras work better when they rotate around and people don't always know where they are. We heard from staff, it's great that they slow down, but if people always know that there's a camera there and we have 2 cameras and they're only in 3 places, what they do is they slow down for 2 minutes while they're driving and then they speed up because they know there's a camera there. So I would much rather save the money. And in 2023, when we've done a comprehensive review and we've got community safety plans in a place, or community safety zones in a place where in numerous places where they can pop up, I think that that will serve a better good to try and tackle the culture of things rather than just having people step on the brake pedal for 15 seconds and then speed up again. I'm not sure that we have enough community safety zones right now at this moment that we're going to warrant the extra $250,000 for 1 year as it goes. But we can have that discussion then. With regards to 2A, you know, I want to take the mystery away from everyone right now who's waiting on data, who's waiting for a silver arrow, who's waiting for the aha moment. It's not going to come. I mean, there will not be all of a sudden a set of numbers that come in that just, you know, transform people's way of thinking. As I said in January, this is about a cultural change. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a week. It doesn't happen in a year. It happens over time where we all agree that going 55 to 60 kilometers on our residential roads is not appropriate. And we have to start somewhere. We have to draw a line in the sand. Many of my council colleagues have been on council way longer than I have, and I've been at this since 2015. So here we are 6 years later. And as I said in January, I personally have no desire to continue to kick this can down the road in search for an albatross that's going to land in front of us and say, here you go. Because it will not happen and it will not be there. But what I'm asking my council colleagues to do is to support the motion that we almost unanimously supported in January, that this council endorses 40 kilometers an hour on all local and minor collector roads, and that we ask staff to come back this fall on a plan to put it in place. So to my eyes, we're almost back-ending a motion for reconsideration here by waiting for something that council has already endorsed. So I'm not sure what we expect to get out of waiting another 4 seasons, another year, to get data that may or may not show, depending on how communications go, depending on signs. Do signs work? Signs don't work. We need more. I mean, I think this is all a lot of smoke and mirrors here in terms of, do we draw a line in the sand like over 20 municipalities in Ontario have done, over dozens more across this country are doing, where 50 kilometers an hour, when you are hit at 50 kilometers an hour, you have an 85% chance of serious injury, if not death. That goes to 30% at 40 kilometers an hour and 5% at 30 kilometers an hour. That's the data and the stats that I'm following. And I don't want one single person who gets hit at 55 kilometers an hour and dies to have to prove that piece of data forward. So, you know, I don't want to waste any more time on this. I will absolutely be voting against the deferral and to move forward with staff's option 1. And I'll be asking for a recorded vote at that time, Your Worship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Separation of items is done on request by any member, so we will vote those separately. Recorded vote is done on request of any member, so absolutely we'll do that. And the next speaker on my list is Councillor Grant.
Thank you. It's interesting he's kicked the can, because actually for the last few votes on this matter, I've been pushing this forward, hoping to see that, I guess if we're going to use the phrase silver arrow, some kind of evidence that that this works. We have, well, first off, just for my notification, to the mover of this amended motion, we will have a chance to vote on this again, I assume. Councillor Duddick, when it comes forward?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the thing is, again, we don't have data. In fact, even our own data hasn't confirmed that this is going to help us. And even reading the staff report, if you look at the top of page 2, and I'm paraphrasing, they're saying that, well, we'll push this on the residents of Oakville, and then we'll check back later to see if it works. So I would prefer that we get more data now. And I understand that we were talking about a cultural change, but we looked at cultural changes when we're talking about people about not drinking and driving, or not distracted driving, or anti-noisemaker laws. And we still have people who feel that they're above that and still break the law. So without evidence, without any kind of proof that 40 kilometers per hour is going to save lives, because we can never be sure that somebody's going to be driving 40 kilometers per hour, even if we say so. There's a big difference that we need to understand between people feeling safe and people actually being safe. And until we can actually prove that people are going to be safe, I'm really concerned about us rushing ahead and pushing this without any good evidence. So I support what Councillor Duddick and Councillor Elgar are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Speaking of Councillor Elgar, he's next.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton, there's no question speeding is an issue in Oakville. It's also an issue in every other municipality in Ontario, from what I hear whenever you go to any conference. I'm also hearing that we're not going to get more police presence. Like, we don't have that magic wand where we can say we need police on every street and they're going to start charging people. That's not going to happen. We need a system that is going to work. Notifying the residents on a sign at 12 entry points in Oakville saying speeds are 40 kilometers everywhere in Oakville. It's a great idea. I don't think that's going to do it. We're going to need, I think, speed signs on the streets, which are 40. If we can get the people to 50, I'd be happy when I drive on the streets. And right now, with one of the test areas on Heritage Way, councillors should take a drive and try circling Heritage Way someday and go 40 kilometers an hour. Just watch, you don't get rear-ended. Like, the system, there's work has to be done. I think we have to talk to the residents in the area, find out where they think the signs should be placed, where it's supposed to be 40. They know more than anybody. They live there. We got to do this. I believe we're on the right road to going with the cameras. To me, you got to hit the pocketbook to make people understand. And that's proven. If you've ever gone through any of the photo radar and got your picture, your license plate, you'll know it kind of makes people think. I'm hoping that staff, when they do come back, have found municipalities where everything is kind of revenue cost neutral, so that it's not costing us a lot of money to the taxpayers to do this. Like, hopefully there's something we can do so that the costs go down. And I understand it sounds like the province has said you can only use one company though at this point, which is, unfortunate, I suppose. But to me, the administrative costs are awfully high, but we don't have a choice. But I think with what the staff are doing and with automated speed enforcement that we're going to be doing and adding cameras, and they can only be in community safety zones. That's what we've been dictated. We can't just put them on streets. So I really think that Councillor Duddick, with what she's done, and actually I'm glad that Councillor Haslett-Thiel is another community safety zone where she wants something. Let's do it, and let's do it right and take the time to do it right. So I'm really happy to support the deferral. It's not a deferral. We're sort of portions we're deferring, but there's a lot we're approving. So this is the good compromise, I believe, tonight, and I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. The next speaker on my list is Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to Councillor Duddick for this motion. I will be supporting it. I would like to ask the mover if she would consider a friendly amendment, and that is that when the study comes back, that staff engage the Halton Regional Police Service to provide a comments and a report on the potential for enforcement going forward. If that's okay, then I have some comments.
I think that's an excellent idea because they're a key component.
Okay, So I want to echo something that that Councillor Grant just said, and it's the only way. What do you say? He's concerned about making people feel safe versus being safe. Or as I've been saying over the last couple of weeks, as I've been considering this vote, it's that whole issue of a false sense of security. We heard from almost, I think, every single residents association that spoke to us today that they love the idea and that they recognize that enforcement is going to be the way to make it work. And we heard people talking about coordinating blitzes and all kinds of proactive measures for enforcement. And the reality is that that is just not in the cards. So what do we achieve by creating this 40-kilometer-an-hour zone without data or empirical evidence that it's going to actually have an impact without the physical enforcement that it probably requires? I'm totally in favor of the cameras. I've been in favor of cameras for many years. I've spoken about it at the region and at the police board. So I'm very happy that we're moving forward with those. And I also support the extra cameras that are being added. But I'm very cautious. This is by far the number one issue that councillors have to deal with. And when I go to AMO, like all of you, we all commiserate about the same issue. It's speeding. This is it may be low hanging fruit to say, oh, we're going to reduce the speed limit and people are just going to comply. I've heard, and rightly so. We have drinking and driving problems. We have distracted driving problems, and simply making a law or a rule about it doesn't do anything unless you enforce it. And until we have the means to properly enforce this, all we're doing is we're creating a panacea on the part of the community to believe that somehow we've done something to make them automatically safer. And I just don't believe that's the case. So I do support the motion. To be clear, I do generally support the initiative of slowing traffic down. And if we could force it down, then that's great. But I don't think this is going to do that. I mean, our speed limits are an advisory thing in most people's minds. And without affecting pocketbooks, as Councillor Elgar said, we're not going to make an impact. And I mean, there's another piece of this too, that I was reading a study about my old neighborhood in South Etobicoke, where they had one of these cameras, and they were talking about the astronomical number of tickets it issued, 9 tickets to the same person. So without points, I think some people are treating it as a cost of doing business or a cost of speeding. And if you're not, so I mean, maybe the financial penalty isn't enough by itself, but certainly that's not an argument against the cameras. It's just something. It's again one of those things that be careful, about your expectations here. So again, I'm supporting the motion. I look forward to seeing the data when it comes back. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the police react to this, and I would like that report to come to council and potentially even arrange to have somebody from the traffic division to come and talk to it when it does come back, so we can have an opportunity to understand the take of the ladies and gentlemen that are enforcing our laws and how they would interpret it and how they would manage it. And with that, I will yield the floor to my next colleague.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Parmer is next on the list.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would also like to add a community safety zone to our list and request that council approve a designation of a community safety zone on Post Road by the new elementary school. David R. Williams, we've had a lot of complaints in that area, and Councillor Sandu and I have discussed this area with staff many times to be implementing a community safety zone, whether it's on Post or Threshing Mill. So I'd like my colleagues to consider that.
Councillor, would you happen to know the start and end point of the community safety zone that you want on Post Road?
Dundas to Threshing Mill.
So,
Councillor Sandu, I invite you to correct me if you agree or disagree.
Okay. So, excuse me. Councillor Parmer, it's in order for Councillor Parmer to move an amendment to add a CSZ on Post Road between Dundas and Threshing Mill. And I would like to put the vote. May I put the vote? Is there an objection to Councillor Palmer's amendment? I see no objection. Councillor Palmer, your amendment carries.
Thank you.
Do you have other comments?
You know, I just, I do have a comment about the signage and, you know, some of the comments that Councillor Elgar made and my colleagues. Just, you know, we've been promoting, I don't think option one in terms of implementation is enough. I really heard what the residents associations had to say about signage, and from other residents as well. We've been promoting, you know, asking our residents to slow down through promotion and community engagement over the years. And, you know, it just hasn't worked. So I think if we were to implement this, we really need to do it with everything we've got. And, you know, there's some pieces missing. And, you know, I did, and I don't know if it's the appropriate time to ask, but I did have questions of staff around option two, because not a lot of details were given. You know, I know it's over 3 years. Is that cost just split down the middle over 3 years? Would we look at implementing 2,800 signs? So I don't know, approximately 900 signs a year. Like, I would want to know what that looks like. The motion before us, you know, we're potentially going to spend $250,000 on the ASC cameras, which have their own function, and, you know, they're also very important, but, you know, it's a lot of money as well. And so I think we should be considering spending more money on signage where it's needed to make sure that this is a successful program.
So my advice about the orderliness of that would be, if the deferral of 2A passes, it's a moot question, and you could ask it when the matter comes back. And if 2A deferral fails, then it would be in order to ask the question at that time. How's that?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, then that means we move to Councillor Robertson.
To say that I'm disappointed is kind of an understatement right now, because in January I was very hopeful about how the fact that we had 13 out of 15 of us say that we were looking at 40 kilometers. And yes, at that point it was over 3 years. And now it feels like, you know, staff had come up with something to make it go quicker. We're looking at municipalities all around us, like Mississauga and Toronto and Burlington, go to 40 kilometers in all residential areas. And we're arguing that we need more data about ours to say we're different when we know speeding isn't different. If this comes to a deferral, I 100% would like your support in adding to 2B that staff include Lakeshore Woods community in the 40 kilometer an hour pilot project, along with the existing West River and Heritage Way 40 kilometer pilot areas. I knocked on a lot of doors in that election, and in the last 3 years, that area has hounded Sean and me about the amount of speeding within their neighborhoods. And we didn't get a chance to get in on a pilot project. For some reason, it wasn't put out to councillors to say, wow, do you have an area that really needs this? Well, Lakeshore Woods is one of those areas that really needs this. They're demanding this. And so we thought we didn't have a problem because it would become 40 kilometers across the board. But right now it seems like that's far off, and we need to do something with that area now. So if the deferral is passed, I'm going to ask for 2B to include Lakeshore Woods as a pilot.
All right, thank you, Councillor. I accept the timing that you're suggesting as sensible. That brings us to Councillor Giddings. As we make our way through the first timers list, I've started a second timers list, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Procedurally, in terms of the report speaks about the proposed quantitative assessment method for the presence of determining community safety zones. We've been adding some on the fly, which I heartily agree with. Just wondering where we go with this motion. If Councillor Duddeck's motion is successful, are the proposed quantitative assessment methods included, or will they be cast aside for now?
Right now they're included, Councillor, and Council has its prerogatives in all matters, and it's free to prescribe the quantitative method and to as your colleague has done, add them because of other reasons, whatever they may be.
All right, because I agree that it should remain there, but I would feel more comfortable if there was a discussion with this council, or if we could follow up individually with staff for clarity on some items. Lynbrook and St. Mildred's automatically would hit the target. What about Oakville Trafalgar High School and Maple Grove, or Oakville Trafalgar and E.J. James? There's nothing definitive in terms of distances or some other measurements. I'd just like to be able to be more definitive when this comes back.
Well, you're certainly free to do that. I don't see a barrier to your wish.
All right, so we can work on that if and when it comes back.
Sure. I mean, hard to know which way it's going to go. I never predict your
Thank you.
All right. That completes everybody on my first time list. The second time list may or may not include Councillor Palmer, and it starts with Councillor O'Meara. And Councillor Palmer, if her hand is still up. Councillor O'Meara, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. So just to clarify, I'll withdraw my separation of item number F now. With more community safety zones, my paper bag argument about the need for more cameras goes away. So I'll happy to withdraw that and add that to the normal ones. And then I would move an amendment then that a community safety zone be included on Ontario Street between Marine Drive and East Street, and also on Trevor Drive from Waterford to Bridge Road. And however they want to vote on that, that would be great, or when that, I'll leave that to you. Thank you, Your Worship.
It's in order to accept an amendment at any time that a member has the floor on the main item. I understand you're moving an amendment to add to community safety zones. Let me just ask the clerk if she caught the beginning and end and the location of your streets.
No, what I got was Ontario, Marine and E Street. I didn't hear it clearly. And also Trevor Drive and something or other, so I need clarification.
Councillor O'Meara, would you be kind enough to assist the clerk by saying it out more clearly somehow, closer to the mic maybe?
Absolutely, Your Worship. Thank you. So on Ontario Street from Marine Drive to East Street, and on Trevor Drive from Waterford to Bridge Road.
Through you, Mayor Burton, could I also get clarification on Councillor Robertson's two added, the two that she added? I have Lakeshore Woods Community.
No, she didn't add anything.
Oh.
What she asked was, she reserved the right to ask the amendment to add a pilot area to the Lakeshore Woods. Depending on what happens. So we have an amendment on the floor. Thank you. Councillor, thank you very much. I did the same thing as so many others. So Councillor Chisholm, your hand is up. Did you want to speak to Councillor O'Meara's amendment?
No, Your Worship. Can I add to a friendly amendment to his amendment?
If you want to stick your spoon into Ward 1, that's very generous of you. Are you sure you want to do that?
It's in Ward 2, but since we're all putting in our safety zone.
Oh, I think you need to wait until he's done his amendment.
Yes.
And then you can move
wait.
one. Okay? We'll take turns. All right. So I'm going to try and call the vote on Councillor O'Meara's amendment now that we all know, and the clerk knows for the record, what the precise dimensions were. Is there an objection to Councillor O'Meara's amendment? Madam Clerk, I see none, and I declare the amendment carried. Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Chisholm.
It's a friendly amendment to look at Phelan from Rebecca to Stewart Street.
Madam Clerk, did you get that? Phelan? Right? Councillor Chisholm?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. I believe he said to Stewart Street.
Correct.
Boy, we're getting yes every time here. That's pretty good tonight. All right. It's in order that the councillor move an amendment, and it's duly moved, and I'd like to know if I can put the vote. Councillor Giddings, your hand is up. Are you waiting your turn for more, or are you, do you want to speak to Councillor Chisholm's amendment?
I'm patiently waiting for more, Mr. Mayor.
All righty. Is there an objection to Councillor Chisholm's amendment? Madam Clerk, there is no objection, and Councillor Chisholm's amendment carries. Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Another location that we had been looking at was Lakeshore Road East, between Douglas and Morrison. That would include Deercroft Montessori, as well as New Central Public School.
All right. As I understand it from driving that route every day, we have flashing 40s on there already, but can staff just confirm that it's not a community safety zone? We just happen to have 40s there? Director Stevens to the rescue.
Through Mayor Burton, that's correct. We just have the flashing 40s there.
All righty. Then
that ties in with my earlier question. Every community safety zone is a 40, but not every 40 is a CZS, yes.
All right. Very good. So may I put the vote on Councillor Giddings' amendment? Councillor Hazeltine, you have your hand up. Are you objecting or wanting to speak to his amendment? Oh, okay. Then is there an objection to Councillor Giddings' amendment? Madam Clerk, I see no objection, and I declare the amendment carried. Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Adams has his hand up. Councillor Adams. Now I get to ask you to turn your
Let's
mic on.
try that again, shall we? Okay. Has to happen at least a couple times every council meeting, right? I'm not raising my hand to add another community safety zone right here on the fly tonight. Councillor Lischina and I have met with staff a number of times over the summer discussing the community safety zones, and we're satisfied to work through the proper system. We know that there are a number of streets that are, I would say, are close to meeting the evaluation criteria that we're setting out here, and we'll happily continue to work with our staff to make sure that they get addressed. The report does include just some discussion about Pinery Crescent, and we're very happy to say that there's going to be some traffic calming put onto Pinery Crescent. And I think once you get traffic calming tools, speed bumps, for example, on a street, the need for a camera kind of goes away, is kind of, I think, where myself and our staff are at. So with that, I'm pleased with the motion that's on the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Adams, and thank you for making the distinction between calming and the community safety zone. Councillor Hazeltine.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I have two things. One is I have another amendment, and this one, we haven't spoken at all tonight about pedestrian crosswalks, and yet they are in the report. And the motion on the floor would, if it was successful, the investment in 2022 would be different in terms of our investment in traffic neighborhood safety. And it has long been my concern that we have a very long list of pedestrian crosswalks. And while we have made progress, and we've been fortunate to get a grant that will allow us to make more progress, not just for my ward, but for all wards, I think that I would like to ask if my council colleagues would allow the inclusion of an additional amendment, which would be that an additional 10 pedestrian crosswalks be advanced in 2022 to make progress on our crossing.
The amendment is in order. Is there discussion? May I put the vote? Councillor Chisholm.
I just want to be clear. You're asking, Councillor Teal, you're asking for another 10 above and beyond what's for the budget? Okay, thank you. What would be the cost in that? Maybe it's a direction to the staff, what the additional cost would be. And we would have to defer that to the budget committee, I would assume.
Well, the good news on that is this goes to the budget committee. So it's a nice, it's a gesture, but it's not the, you know, it's not an allocation. However, the CAO may have an answer, perhaps.
If I understand the crosswalks, there is 20 that are already planned based on this report in 2022. 10 of them based on town funding and 10 of them based on other funding that we're receiving in. And so that in 2023, when you're considering the 2024 budget, I think that may be the time that you'd want to consider what is the long-term spending for the crosswalks, rather than make that decision tonight when you already have the 20 in 22, if that answered the question.
No, the question was, what's the cost of 10 more?
$500,000.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hazlet-Deal has moved her motion. It's in order. Councillor Knoll has his hand up. Are you commenting, discussing?
I have another amendment.
Well, wait your turn.
Yep.
Councillor Adams, are you?
I'm asking a point of clarification on this particular issue. So adding an extra 10, I'm wondering, are we just going down this list? Do staff have the capacity to do that additional work if an extra $500,000 was thrown at it out of reserves or some other funding source?
Thank you, Councillor. Staff, can you handle 30 instead of 20?
Mayor Burton, we had put the 20 in as being able to handle in 2022. We are not able to handle an additional 10 unless there is some additional resources that come with that as well as part of the budget submission.
All right. Well, I'm going to put the vote. One of the things that council could do is, I mean, even if council doesn't accept this amendment, any councillors always welcome to come to the budget committee and ask for whatever they think the town needs. So, Councillor Adams, your hand is still up.
I only to say, I'm not going to support this amendment right now, but I'm happy to have that discussion through the budget to determine whether we ought to be upping our annual amount on a more ongoing basis rather than doing 31 year, 10 the next, and that kind of thing.
Alrighty.
And so I think it might be a good process there.
So Councillor Hazlet-Deal and Councillor Knoll, your hands are up. I'll go to Councillor Knoll and then back to Councillor Hazlet-Deal. And then to Councillor Elgar. But nobody's talking.
I put my hand up because I wanted to make another amendment, so my hand's on reserve.
Oh, okay. You can take it down for now to keep from confusing me then, please. Councillor Hazlet-Deal and then Councillor Elgar.
My hand was up purely to just ask for clarification on how many were in 2022, because we're playing catch up in 21, the 20 in 22, and there were, in the report, there were some 21s that were 22. So I still believe that pedestrian crosswalks need to be a higher priority from a traffic safety perspective.
I'll leave the amendment on the floor.
Thank you very much. Madam CAO.
My apologies, Councillor Haslett-Thiel. You are correct. It is 20 that we're doing in this particular year because of the funding we received. And as part of the budget, we're looking at doing 10 in 2022.
All right. Okay, that's super to have all that clarification. Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. I just want clarification. I think what Councillor Haslett-Thiel is not saying she doesn't want them all just for Ward 3. She's just saying the next 10. Am I correct or am I incorrect on that?
Yes,
Okay.
we all understand
okay.
her to be saying that she wants 2022 to have 10 more than the 10 that she wants to go to 20. In short, she wants to go to 20 for 2022.
Yeah,
And,
so that makes sense. We did it. We did it 1 year. We can do it in 2. We can do it 2 years. So I'll support that for sure.
All righty. So, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, your hand is up again. Is that because you want to speak again? I see. It looks like I can put the vote then. Is there any objection to the motion by the amendment by Councillor Haslett-Thiel? Councillor Chisholm?
Yes, point of order, Your Worship. I'm just for clarification here. So when the CAO says we can do 20, and that's our limit, is that correct? Is that what I heard from her originally, or she can, or the staff can only support 10 for 2022?
I'm going to let her speak for herself, but I thought she was fairly clear, but I'm not going to take a chance at interpreting it. Madam CAO.
And actually, Mayor Burton, if I can just go back to the budget session that we had for the 2021 budget, the request was made, I think, at that time to up the amount of crosswalks to the 20. And our response from staff at that point in time was that we didn't have the resources to handle that. We then had an opportunity to get 10 additional crosswalks funded in 2021 through federal provincial funding. And so because of that funding coming in, we made room in our staffing to be able to accommodate that work by shifting things around. So that was a special circumstances that we were able to accommodate it. On a normal basis, my understanding is that we can accommodate 10 within the resourcing we have. In addition, I'd add in 2022, we're starting a fairly extensive program here, if it is finally approved at the Budget Committee in terms of funding, for a very extensive neighborhood traffic program. So when we add all of those elements together, I think it would be challenging for us to do that. And what I would suggest is that if this is the package that you'd like to see, that we actually report through the Budget Committee in terms of any additional resourcing requirements to do the full implementation of what you're looking at tonight.
Thank you, CAO. Councillor Chisholm.
So the suggestion is that we could defer this to the Budget Committee, correct?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. That's what I would say. That would be my motion to defer this to the Budget Committee.
You want to move to defer the councillor's amendment to the Budget Committee. Well, that's in order, and it's not really debatable. So I'm going to put the vote. Is there an objection deferring Councillor Haslett-Thiel's amendment to the budget request to the Budget Committee? Councillor Giddings and Councillor Haslett-Thiel, perhaps, are objecting. The deferral carries. Thank you, everybody. Are we ready to go to the main matter? Councillor Knoll, we're not. You're next.
Thank you. In keeping with the spirit of community safety zone gifts tonight, the Councillor Grant and I would like to put forward Central Park between Glen Ashton and Oak Park Boulevard. Similar rationale to Ontario Street. It is adjacent to what has become a very, very busy park. It's about to become a lot busier with a brand new recreation activity basketball court center, and it's got these treacherous chicanes in the road that are very difficult to see oncoming traffic. So this street would benefit greatly from a community safety zone, and we would appreciate your support. And I won the coin toss as to who got to present it. Councillor Grant, right?
All right. Councillor Hazard-Thiel, are you speaking about Councillor Knoll's amendment? Thank you. May I put the vote on Councillor Knoll's amendment? Is there an objection to Councillor Knoll's amendment? Madam Clerk, I see no objection, and I declare the amendment carried. Thank you. All right. Have we come to the main motion with its separations now? I think we may have. So, Councillor Hazard-Thiel, perhaps we haven't.
So with all my questions and amendment, I didn't get a chance to speak to the motion in its, so would now be the time?
If I'm being allowed to put it to a vote, yes, now's the time.
Okay. So I too am disappointed that we are where we are today. And I think that we're there for a variety of reasons. And I respect that people want something Oakville based in order to make their decision. I hope that contrary to what was said by a delegate tonight, that we don't base our decision on the fact that X number of fatalities or collisions have occurred in our town, because I think we all want to go to sleep at night knowing that our road network is as safe as we reasonably can make it. And in fact, the data never shows near misses, and many accidents are not reported. And so data can be flawed, and we have a wealth of data out in and around the world that talks about the importance of protecting pedestrians and cyclists, and the danger of higher speeds. And the truth of the matter is, this isn't about 40, it really is about 60, because we have roads that people continue to push the mark, and they either don't get traffic calming or they are not caught. And it's disheartening, because if we take 40, we probably are going to get closer to 48, which at least will make some adjustment and will, based on the research I've read, have an impact on safety. What the RAs have said is they obviously feel that it's important, and it's a united front in large part through Ward 3 that they believe it will make a difference. I struggle with a deferral because what we're not saying is how we will improve getting the data, and how will we improve the analysis of that data in the actual amendment. And that's disconcerting, because we could end up back where we are today with data that isn't necessarily as fulsome as we like, without as many facts, and yet people walk our streets and look to us for safety. So I am quite torn, because pushing it down the road for those results may not get us any further in the progress. However, I have a lot of respect for my council colleagues. I recognize that we will make some progress with automated speed enforcement. We're going to get some community safety zones. So while I am incredibly disappointed that it's on the table, I do think that there is progress here, and sometimes that's what we have to go with.
Thank you, Councillor. All right. I would like to put before you all of the main motion, except for the two separated items of 2A and 2B. Is that, and that's where we'll start. I see no objection. Is there any, Councillor Hazard-Thiel, you'll confuse me if your hand is up. So if you could take that down unless you mean it, that would be good. Thank you. All right. Now, is there an objection to the main motion, all parts except 2A and 2B? Madam Clerk, I see no objection, and I declare that portion of this carried. Thank you, everybody. Now for 2A, I'll put 2A at the request of Councillor O'Meara. We're doing this one separately. Is there an objection to 2A? Show your hand. Councillor O'Meara, it's close. Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Robertson, it's close, but 2A carries. Is there an objection to?
Sorry, Your Worship, I asked for a recorded vote on that one as well.
The clerk will record the vote as you two against and the rest in favor. It's a bookkeeping exercise. If you unless you want to spend more time on this, I don't think you do at 9:40. But anyway, 2B. Is there an objection to 2B?
Your Honor, will 2B add the motion that I asked, the amendment to add Lakeshore Woods into the pilot project before we vote on it?
Yes. Now I've called 2B and amending 2B to add a pilot zone to these two would be in order. So, Councillor Elgar?
Mayor Burton, when we do pilot projects, I know there was a lot of work done by staff to find out how many entrances there were to this location so that they would have some degree of accuracy with the data they were collecting during normal times. I'm wondering if staff could just comment whether Lakeshore Woods would fit, do they think it would even, if it would fit the criteria? If it fits the criteria, fine. But if there's something that's outside, I just want to hear from staff on that. Before we, before I agree that I would like it, because if they're saying it won't work, then I think we should stop it.
All right, well, they're thinking about it. And here comes the verdict. The jury foreman, no, I shouldn't joke, it's serious. Mr. McGuire is here with the staff answer.
Through you, Mayor Burton. So first of all, the description of the Lakeshore Woods area, we would need sort of some more detail in terms of what streets would form the boundaries for that area. But I can speak to generally the criteria that we used for the existing two neighborhood zones was that they were both areas that had a limited number of entrances. And the logic there is that because there's only perimeter signing, we're trying to target neighborhoods that have a limited amount of traffic infiltration or cut-through traffic. So when you have a limited number of entrances and say a physical barrier like West River where you have the valley on one side, that limits the cut-through traffic, and therefore you're dealing mainly with residents who live in that area, and therefore the limited signs have an impact. So I guess we would like to get a more detailed description of what exactly is meant by Lakeshore Woods, and then we could answer more accurately.
Is this something that could be brought before council, though, without having to wait through all the rest of the seasons?
Councillor Robertson, how about I make this, can I try to offer you a suggestion? Perhaps you could leave off this request and instead leave it as a request to staff that they bring back to the next council meeting a report on what kind of pilot they could conduct in the Lakeshore Woods area. It is a defined neighborhood in our official plan, and the staff could start with that definition. I consulted a map briefly, and there are more entrances and exits to it than there are to these other two. And so that is a rational concern that staff are raising. But perhaps they could, in a month, bring you back something, if not the whole loaf, then most of it.
I would be fine with that.
All right. Then I will put the vote on 2B after I recognize Councillor O'Meara.
Sorry, Your Worship, thank you for that. So there are only 3 entrances into Lakeshore Wood: Lakeshore, Rebecca, and Wavecrest. It's got a Facebook group of 2,000 people, so it's highly connected, and all the streets are self-contained. So it's separated by Shell Park on the east side and by a natural park on the west side, and two major roads on the north and south. And you know, if Councillor Robertson doesn't want to go forward with this motion, I mean, I would be happy to put this motion forward. Again, I never wished to do this piecemeal, but this community has been waiting since January for what we told them was coming this fall and would be back in by next spring. It's a community that Councillor Robertson has already arranged for police and engineering staff to go and do an entire speed presentation because they are foaming at the mouth over speeding in this area. It is not anything different from the other two areas that have already got pilot projects. And again, back when we approved these pilot projects, I had brought up this community and was told, well, we'll just do these pilot projects, and when we're done, we can unroll everything. So here we are a year and a bit later, and now we're asking to wait another bit later. And again, if the rest of council wants to, wait on this, that's fine, but we have an obligation to our community, and I'd at least appreciate a vote on this up or down. But again, I haven't moved the motion, so I'll leave it with Councillor Robertson on that.
All right. Look, I'm in, your chair is in sympathy with Councillor Robertson's motion, and with the 1 month delay, I was seeking to get away for that to happen. You've defined the territory more precisely, and I'm comfortable with that definition. Is staff comfortable with that definition? Yes, they are. So, so I will support Councillor Robertson's amendment, and I'll ask, is there an objection to her amendment? Oh, Councillor Grant, your hand is up. Are you speaking or objecting?
Speaking and I guess possibly objecting. With the greatest respect, we all have communities in our wards that have issues with speeding that we've made promises to that we try and help. And just as earlier we talked about how there was no way that we could get a police chief to enforce something that we feel is important in our community, I think it's wrong-headed for us to try and, as Councillor O'Meara himself said, piecemeal something together here to force town staff to enforce something that they feel that they've promised to their community. It just feels unfair to, our communities and other wards where we have similar issues and probably would like to try a pilot too.
Thank you for that. With that, I'm going to put the vote. Is there objection to Councillor Robertson's amendment? Councillor Grant, Councillor Adams, and Councillor Knoll. It's close, but Councillor Robertson, your amendment carries. Thank you. Now, I'll put the main motion of what's left, which is 2B itself. Councillor Grant, did you want to speak to that as well, or do you? Okay, so your hand is up. I'm just proving that I'm paying attention to your hand. All right. Then, is there an objection to 2B? Not actually seeing an objection. 2B is carried unanimously. And there was a request that that be a recorded vote, and the clerk will record everyone in support of that. Thank you, everybody. And that completes some very long work. Council, I'm going to propose, considering how long we've been at this and the possibility that you might benefit from a short break, that we recess for a few minutes and resume at 10 p.m. sharp. Is that all right? We are in recess. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the brief recess. It's said to be best practice on this Zoom business when you've met for a couple hours like we did. Council, the first order of business here is to first look for a motion to go past the hour, because I can tell we're not going to finish what's left in 30 minutes. Councillor Duddick, is that your hand there? Thank you very much. Any objection? There being no objection, that carries, Madam Clerk. The next thing is the 9.3, the Oakville Enterprises Corporation financial update, and the We have a presentation from Rob Lister, the CEO of Oakville Enterprises Corporation. And I believe he's present and admitted to the meeting. Welcome, Mr. Lister, Mr. McCann, and Mr. Brennan. I hope that you've unmuted yourself and you're ready to share your information.
Thank you much, Mayor Burton. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, you're heard very well.
Perfect, great. Well, good evening, Mayor Burton and members of council. On the video call with me today are Board Chair David Brennan and Chief Strategy and Growth Officer Sean McCoggan. We're very pleased to be here this evening, of course, to provide you an update on Oakville Enterprises and Oakville Hydro. We have some exciting developments and accomplishments to report on, and I would like to welcome Sean McCoggan to present our update. After the presentation, and of course during it, if there's any questions, we're certainly available to answer. So Sean, over to you to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Is everybody hearing me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Terrific. Good evening, Mayor Burton and councillors. I'm looking forward to our presentation tonight, where we will focus on some recent successes and highlights at OEC. Next slide, please. For our update tonight, we have 4 categories on the agenda. Plan on covering how we have been increasing our capabilities, several recent awards and recognition, an update on our pandemic response, as well as community engagement. To begin, I'd like to provide some context about why increasing our capabilities, number 1 on the agenda, is important. At OEC, we have a strategic plan, and to help our organization deliver services today and in the future, and to meet customers' evolving needs supported by growth target. This requires adding significant capabilities and scale for our existing businesses as we enhance our core offering, create solutions in emerging areas. I'm pleased to report that our efforts are paying off and OEC is executing well against the strategy. To provide you a review of recent efforts, the next 4 slides speak to these compelling achievements. Next slide, please. Let's begin earlier this year in Western Canada for our first update on adding capability. In line with our strategic plan to increase our services in Western Canada, we welcome EMB Management to OEC. EMB Management, based in Vancouver, is a provider of engineering, inspection, project management, and quality assurance services primarily to the gas distribution industry. We found this to be a dynamic team with years of technical experience in their field, and we are looking forward to working with them. Next slide, please. This year, we also added further bench strength in power distribution engineering services with the addition of DPM Energy. DPM Energy is located in Vaughan. They bring significant technical power distribution design and engineering capabilities to OEC. With the trends in electrification that are underway, we see many areas where these capabilities can help design future infrastructure. Next slide, please. A very recent update is where we enhanced our construction capabilities by welcoming the leading provider of electrical and associated utility distribution infrastructure construction services, TransPower. TransPower is also located in Vaughan. For over 30 years, TransPower has been one of the largest utility distribution construction firms in Ontario, specializing in the installation of electrical infrastructure. TransPower's key services are comprised of construction, project management, and design build project delivery. TransPower has extensive capabilities, including over 300 employees, with their work being highly regarded in the industry. Next slide, please. Our 4th slide on this topic is focused on a unique partnership we announced with Geosource Energy, Canada's premier geothermal borefield construction specialist. OEC has seen an increase in the uptake and demand for GeoExchange geothermal solutions for buildings, and we remain very positive the role this low carbon energy solution will have. With both organizations already providing solutions in this area with different skill sets, we set out together to offer a comprehensive solution to the market. designed to meet the needs of customers seeking these low carbon energy systems. Next slide, please. The recent updates that I just highlighted contributes to building significant scale and capability for OEC, particularly for our infrastructure services line of business that you'll see on the left, and an important step forward in our renewable generation portfolio on the right of the page. Today, OEC can now perform a carefully developed group of associated services with greater capability in additional geographies, all supported by approximately 2,000 employees. Next slide, please. Taking a step back, these new and existing capabilities all form part of our strategic plan to assemble the required talent and know-how, provide a suite of services that our clients are seeking. Whether it is delivering reliable electricity to customers, building renewable energy solutions, or helping utilities and infrastructure owners meet their needs, these services remain in high demand, and our technical capability has never been stronger to support these customers. I can tell you our team is very proud of this accomplishment. The advent of large-scale infrastructure renewal programs, electrification of our economy, telecommunications connectivity, and 5G, OEC can realize its long-term vision of delivering to customers in Oakville, delivering in Ontario, and building our delivery capabilities in other parts of Canada as well. Next slide, please. I'm also very pleased to highlight that our teams continue to be recognized within the industry for tremendous work they're doing, and it is being noticed. Today, we have 4 awards listed on this slide, with Oakville Hydro putting in a strong performance, receiving 3 of these awards. Just very briefly, I'll touch on the awards. The first is the Globe and Mail recognizing DPM Energy for a 3rd year in a row as one of Canada's top growing companies. Second award was for exhibiting innovation, where Oakville Hydro received the Canadian Electricity Association's 2020 Centre of Excellence Award for Spatial Intelligence. Moving on, in the area of safety, Oakville Hydro received the Performance Achievement Milestone Award from the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association for achieving 1.75 million hours with no lost time injury. And finally, Oakville Hydro received the Customer Service Excellent Award presented at the OEA, the Ontario Energy Association 2021 Energy Awards. Pictured here are 4 team members from Oakville Hydro, including Scott Moody, COO of Oakville Hydro, holding the OEA customer service. Next slide, please. We've continued to be successful throughout the pandemic, which is in part due to continued planning and coordination. Our task force has led over 200 plus meetings to plan and stay ahead of developments that drives further actions by our entire organization to stay safe. Oakville Hydro has helped implement provincial funding to customers, and our teams have continued to reliably deliver electricity and services to customers. You've heard this message from us before, and we can't say enough about the resiliency of our employees during this time. Throughout the entire pandemic, people have stepped up, remained safe, and found solutions whenever there was an obstacle from the pandemic. Next slide, please. Lastly, I would like to note several community support events. Recently, employees supported local charities, including the Enbridge Ride to Conquer Cancer, Terry Fox Run, and Laps Around Lymphoma Challenge. And in this photo, we also presented the Oakville Hospital Foundation with a $10,000 donation from a recent customer survey program by Oakville Hydro. Throughout the year, our employees have continued to fundraise in virtual environments and are pleased to support these causes. Next slide, please. This concludes OEC's quarterly update this evening. On behalf of the organization, I would like to thank you for providing us the opportunity to share OEC's quarterly update with you. Rob and I would welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you, Sean, for the presentation and the outstanding achievements. You might not be EPCOR yet, but you're really taking some steps in that direction here. Councillor Longo is first, and then I think Councillor Lischina. Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sean and Rob, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of quick questions. With the GeoSource acquisition, do you see any geothermal opportunities within Oakville to help with the climate emergency we talked about and energy task force? That's my first question. The second is, with the diversity now of OEC, with infrastructure announcements, federally as well as provincially, do you see are you bullish on opportunities for OEC with those initiatives?
Mr. Mayor, thanks very much for the questions, Councillor. I'm going to pass that to Sean. He is absolutely in the best position to answer both those questions. Sean.
Thank you, Rob, and through you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the first question, GeoExchange. So we did in fact partner with GeoSource, and absolutely in Oakville, like many communities in Ontario, we have seen opportunities. We have GeoExchange systems today in Oakville, and we see opportunity for more. And we have been in discussions with some developers in the area. Moving to your second question, with respect to infrastructure services and the wave of infrastructure volume that you see, whether that is in telecom or electrification and other areas, civil, et cetera. It's been a long-term trend that this organization has really invested a lot of time to understand and manage around and plan for. That's part and parcel why we put a lot of these investments together with these organizations to join OEC. We see, if we look forward in the next 5 or 10-year cycles, the continued requirement for infrastructure build out as demographics continue to grow in Ontario is quite compelling.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Lister and Mr. McCoggin. That was excellent information. And first of all, I want to thank all the employees for the generosity that and the community support. That's wonderful to see. Thank you for letting us know about the acquisitions. Have there been any divestments of any companies?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. A number of years ago, we divested of our home comfort business, but in the last recent periods, we have not divested, but we are regularly looking at opportunities when it may make sense for us to divest, but we are not in the process at the moment of any divestitures. And council would be like the second to find it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no more questions, would someone like to move the indicated motion in the agenda? Councillor Dudek, thank you. That's the presentation from Rob Lister, President and CEO of Oakville, and his staff regarding Oakville Enterprises Corporation be received. Any objection? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Lister, Mr. Sean McCann, and Mr. Brennan. Keep up the good work. Council is counting on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Council, the next item is 9.4, the review and assessment of park enforcement. There's the Director of Municipal Enforcement Services, Mr. Jim Barry, is present for your questions. And if you have no questions, because when I read the report, I thought, gee, this is pretty easy to say yes to, I'll look for a motion. Councillor Chisholm, are you giving a motion or posing questions or both?
I move the motion, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Is there an objection to Councillor Chisholm's motion? There being no objection, it carries. Mr. Barry, thank you for being available.
Thank you.
And Madam Clerk, the next item is the sign face area review. And Council, we have a listed delegation, and I had an opportunity to chat with him about his concern. And I believe that our best interest would be to refer this report to the next meeting of Council to allow the delegation and the staff to consult on some very fine arcane calculations that I'm pretty sure we don't want to do at council. And so is one of you willing to move that referral? Councillor Knoll, thank you very much. Council, is there an objection to that referral? Seeing none, that carries. Thank you very much, everybody. The next item is the 2022 municipal election bylaw, and that's bylaw 2021-123. A presentation is available from Andrea Coyne, the manager of elections, if you need it. I think you can take the report as read myself. Somebody give me a hand as to what you want to do. Councillor Adams, how about you?
I'd be happy to move 9.6.
Thank you.
Is
there a question or about it? Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Worship, and I do appreciate the clerk's clarification earlier this afternoon on a question I had. It had to do with posting any candidate's personal home address online, which many of us find ourselves posting. I think the climate today has created all kinds of challenges for us, and I just want to make sure that on the forms that any candidate decides to fill out to run next year, that I understand they have to have it in the clerk's office, their home address, but they don't have to have that posted online. If the clerk might just be very upfront with any candidate coming in as they fill out the forms, saying if you want your home address posted online, please here. If not, then it can be home. I think that would go a long way in assuring that people's privacy is still is protected, at the same time ensuring that our Elections Ontario obligations are met. So I'd appreciate that, and I thank the clerk for her due diligence on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Meara. The motion's moved. May I put the vote? Any objection to the motion? There's no objection, Madam Clerk. The motion carries. Andrea, thank you for being available. The next item is the 2022 Municipal Election Contribution Rebate Program, and Councillor Adams has circulated a version of this motion that would read as it was listed in the agenda, but adding at the end of paragraph 3 the words "as revised" by excluding the words "to a maximum rebate of $375" under section 13B. Councillor Adams, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. You've already read out the motion and with the minor amendment, and the effect is simply to move us back to where we were at the last election in terms of the way the rebate program worked, which I believe worked well for the community.
Thank you. May I put the vote? Is there an objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. The next item is the Two Wharf and Waterfront Attraction Update. It's basically a report that says there's no news yet. Stay tuned. We just need a motion to receive the no news yet. Councillor Chisholm, thank you for the motion. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, that carries. And now we have no confidential discussion items listed for this agenda. We do have, we need someone to move that the minutes of the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting of September 9th be received. Councillor Robertson, thank you for that. Is there an objection? There is no objection, and that carries. Now all we need is a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Longo, thank you. Is there an objection? There's no objection, and that carries. I rise and report. The Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent item 7.1, confidential consent item 8.1, discussion items 9.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, and 0.8, and advisory committee minutes. Item 11.1 is noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for the report would be appreciated and in order. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Lischina, thank you. Any objection to the motion? There being no objection, the motion is adopted. Thank you very much. You have your information items circulated electronically and your status of outstanding issues, but we have new business. There's a motion by Councillor Adams, and we need a second for that now that we've risen and back into council. And the motion is that in accordance with section 2, sub 2 of the procedure bylaw, the rules of procedure established in section 14.1 sub 2 be waived to permit consideration of the following notice of motion upon its introduction today. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Dudek, thank you. Is there an objection to this motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and the procedure bylaw is waived. The notice of motion is by Councillor Knoll and Councillor Grant, and it concerns the remote issuance of marriage licenses. And I'll turn the floor over to Councillor Knoll, who can speak to it and explain it for the public. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you. Give me 1 second here. My computer just timed out. In a sense, we've all been getting lots of feedback from members of the public with respect to the COVID rules in Town Hall and the lack of ability to secure marriage licenses from our clerk's department due to people's vaccination hesitancy. This resolution essentially is our request to the province of Ontario to facilitate a rule change so that we're able to provide access to marriage licenses externally to Town Hall in terms of swearing in. Perhaps we could put the resolution up on the screen so the public can have a look at it. Is that possible?
Yes, we certainly can, but the action part of the resolution is quite simple. And it is that the town of Oakville requests the Office of the Registrar General provide a framework to marriage issuers to enable remote oath-taking for the purpose of issuing marriage licenses to couples that do not have proof of vaccination. And that is so simple, I'm not sure, do you really need it up there?
I don't absolutely need it up there.
Okay.
I just couldn't, my computer just shut down, my agenda computer, so I couldn't read it. I wanted to read it. Thank you for doing that. I think it's a fairly simple matter. I think if we're able to achieve this, it's going to solve a lot of concern and angst in the community. And with your support, we'll send this motion off with Godspeed to get the Premier and his colleagues' support for it.
All right. May I put the vote? Is there an objection to this motion? Madam Clerk, I see no objection, and I exercise my privilege as a council member to ask that you record the names of everyone in favor of it, i.e. that it be a recorded vote. Council, that brings us to the regional reports and question period regarding town boards and advisory committees, and I'll pause and look for any. That brings us to requests for reports, and I'm not seeing any, but I have a little bit of business for you that I hope you will enjoy. The other day, Oakville's distinguished junior hockey team, the Oakville Blades, played their first game of the season with the Burlington Cougars in Burlington. And the mayor of Burlington apparently suggested to everyone that if the Cougars won, she would ask me to wear a Cougars jersey. And as you will know, the Blades won. And so in the spirit of camaraderie and neighborliness, I thought that it behooved me to have a Blades jersey made for Mayor Mead Ward. And here it is. And it's being delivered to her in time for the regional council meeting on Wednesday. And we'll see if she'd like to wear it. And no matter what, she's getting a very, very high-class jersey, a real Blades jersey. And they went to the trouble of putting her name on it for her. So there you go. I hope everybody enjoys that. We now need a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws as listed in the agenda. And for 122, it's as revised. Councillor Elgar, thank you for moving it. Councillor Grant, thank you for seconding it. Is there an objection? I see no objection. The bylaws are considered and read. Thank you, everybody. That completes our business for this meeting and ends it. It's been terrific working with you. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you again.